stops in front of a room full of executives, everyone freezes, except the janitor they don't even see. Caleb Mercer has 60 seconds to save a life, but the price of heroism might destroy everything he's fought to build. One act of courage, one frozen moment, one choice that will tear apart a corporation and expose the brutal truth about who gets believed and who gets erased. This is the story of a man who refused to let someone die, and the system that punished him for it. If you're watching from anywhere in the world, drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story reaches. Now, let's begin. The Philadelphia skyline burned gold through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ashford Industries executive boardroom on the 42nd floor, but Caleb Mercer barely had time to notice. His cleaning cart squeaked against the polished marble as he moved methodically along the hallway outside, the sound a familiar rhythm in the silence of the late evening. Most of the building had emptied hours ago, executives streaming toward luxury cars and private drivers, but the top floors always held stragglers. People who lived for the next deal, the next presentation, the next moment to prove they belonged in rooms where decisions worth millions happened between sips of imported water. Caleb didn't belong in those rooms. He knew that. Everyone knew that. His navy blue uniform with the Ashford Industries cleaning contractor logo said it plainly. You are here to make things clean, not to be seen, and that suited him just fine. He'd learned a long time ago that being invisible had its advantages. It meant fewer questions about his past, fewer judgments about his choices, fewer people who could hurt what mattered most. What mattered most was currently at home with Mrs. Lorna Pike, their neighbor in the cramped apartment building on the edge of Kensington. Sadie Mercer, age 7, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubbornness, though Caleb tried not to think about that second part too much. Thinking about Elena meant thinking about the accident, the hospital, the machines that beeped until they didn't, and the moment the doctor said there was nothing more they could do. 2 years didn't make those memories easier. It just made them quieter. Sadie didn't remember much about her mother anymore. Sometimes that felt like mercy. Sometimes it felt like theft. Caleb pushed the cart past the boardroom entrance, catching a glimpse through the half-open door of the presentation still in progress. Unusual for this late, nearly 8 o'clock, but Ashford Industries operated on its own schedule. The company had its fingers in everything from commercial real estate to tech startups to pharmaceutical development. And from what Caleb had overheard during countless nights of cleaning executive offices, they were in the middle of a major expansion. New buildings, new acquisitions, new territories to conquer. He recognized a few faces through the doorway. Grant Hollowell, the CFO, stood near the head of the table with his arms crossed, his expression carved from granite. Hollowell had a reputation even among the cleaning staff, a man who treated every interaction as a negotiation and every person as either an asset or an obstacle. Beside him, Patricia Chen from legal reviewed something on her tablet, her face unreadable. Several other executives clustered around the presentation screen, their attention fixed on the woman at the front of the room. Vivian Ashford. Even from the hallway, she commanded space. Late 30s, sharp-featured, dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Caleb's rent for 3 months. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and she moved through her slide deck with the precision of someone who'd been speaking to boardrooms since before she could legally drink. Which, given that she'd inherited Ashford Industries at 24 after her father's sudden death, wasn't far from the truth. Caleb had seen her exactly 3 times in his 18 months working for the cleaning contractor. Once stepping out of an elevator, phone pressed to her ear, not even registering his existence as he held the door. Once in the lobby, surrounded by assistants, moving through the space like water around stones. And once late at night, standing alone in her office on the 43rd floor, staring out at the city with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. He'd backed away quietly that time, not wanting to intrude on whatever private moment she was having. Now she was mid-sentence, gesturing toward a graph that showed projected revenue growth, when something changed. It was subtle at first, a slight hitch in her speech, a hand moving to her chest. Caleb, about to continue down the hallway, paused. Something about the movement caught his attention, the way she touched her sternum, the way her other hand gripped the edge of the podium. As you can see, Vivian continued, her voice slightly strained, the fourth quarter projections indicate a strong... She stopped. Her hand pressed harder against her chest. Her breathing had gone shallow, rapid. Caleb could see it even from the doorway, the way her shoulders rose and fell too quickly. Ms. Ashford. Patricia Chen stood, concern flashing across her professional mask. Are you all right? Vivian swayed. Her face had gone pale, a sheen of sweat visible across her forehead. I'm fine. Just need a moment. But she wasn't fine. Caleb knew that with sudden crystalline certainty. He'd seen this before, not personally, but in the community CPR course he'd taken at the rec center 6 months ago. The instructor, a retired EMT named Rodriguez, had drilled scenarios into them until Caleb could recite the warning signs in his sleep. Chest pain, sudden pallor, difficulty breathing. The body's desperate signals that something vital was failing. Vivian took a step back from the podium, her hand still pressed to her chest. The executives around the table watched with varying expressions: concern, confusion, irritation at the interruption. Grant Hollowell checked his watch. Should we call someone? One of the younger executives asked, his voice uncertain. Give her a moment, Hollowell said tersely. She's probably just... Vivian's legs gave out. She didn't fall dramatically. There was no cry, no theatrical collapse. One moment she was standing, and the next her knees simply buckled, her body crumpling to the floor with a soft thud that somehow sounded louder than any scream could have been. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. Oh my God! Someone call... What's happening? Don't touch her. Should we move her? The executives surged forward and backward simultaneously, some reaching toward Vivian's still form, others backing away as if proximity to the problem might make them responsible for solving it. Patricia Chen had her phone out, fingers hovering over the screen. Grant Hollowell stood frozen, his face cycling through expressions too quickly to read. Caleb dropped the handle of his cleaning cart and moved. He didn't think about whether he should. Didn't consider the unspoken rules about spaces he wasn't supposed to occupy, conversations he wasn't supposed to join, emergencies he wasn't qualified to handle. He thought about Rodriguez demonstrating chest compressions on the plastic dummy. He thought about the way the instructor had looked each of them in the eye and said, when someone stops breathing, you have 4 to 6 minutes before brain damage becomes inevitable. If you know CPR and you do nothing, you have to live with that choice forever. Caleb couldn't live with that choice. He pushed through the boardroom door, past executives who barely registered his presence, and dropped to his knees beside Vivian Ashford's motionless body. Up close, it was worse. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, her chest wasn't moving, and when Caleb pressed his fingers to her neck searching for a pulse, he felt nothing. Nothing but the smooth coolness of skin and the absence of the rhythm that meant life. Hey! Grant Hollowell's voice cut through the chaos. What the hell do you think you're doing? Caleb ignored him. He tilted Vivian's head back slightly, checking her airway, then positioned his hands on her sternum exactly the way Rodriguez had taught. Heel of one hand in the center of the chest, other hand on top, fingers interlaced, elbows locked. Someone call 911, Caleb said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Tell them we have an unresponsive patient, no pulse, CPR in progress. You can't just... Hollowell started. Caleb began compressions. Hard and fast, Rodriguez's voice echoed in his memory. At least 2 inches deep, at least 100 compressions per minute. You'll be exhausted after 2 minutes, but you keep going, because the alternative is you watch someone die. 1, 2, 3, 4. Caleb counted under his breath, keeping the rhythm. Vivian's body moved under his hands, her chest compressing and releasing, mechanical and wrong, but necessary. He could feel ribs flexing under his palms, could hear the awkward sound of air being forced in and out of lungs that had stopped working on their own. This is insane, someone said. He's a janitor. Has someone called an ambulance? Patricia Chen's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the muttering. She had her phone pressed to her ear. Yes, 42nd floor, Ashford Industries. Woman in her late 30s, cardiac arrest, CPR in progress. How long? Unknown. Caleb reached 30 compressions and shifted position, tilting Vivian's head back, lifting her chin, pinching her nose shut. He took a breath and sealed his mouth over hers, breathing out, watching her chest rise. Once, twice, then back to compressions. That's when the room turned. Oh my God, is he kissing her? The voice came from somewhere to Caleb's right, high-pitched with shock or disgust or both. He didn't look up, didn't break rhythm. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Get him off her! Another voice, male, angry. Security! Someone get security! He's giving her CPR, you idiots, Patricia snapped, but her voice was drowned out by others. That's not CPR, he's taking advantage. This is completely inappropriate. Caleb kept going. The voices didn't matter. The accusations didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the compressions, the breaths, the rhythm that might restart a heart that had stopped beating. His arms were already beginning to burn, his shoulders aching, but he'd been warned about that. Effective CPR was exhausting. It was supposed to be exhausting. Comfortable CPR meant you weren't pushing hard enough. Footsteps thundered into the room, heavy, purposeful. Security. Sir, you need to step away from Ms. Ashford. A hand clamped on Caleb's shoulder, trying to pull him back. Not finished, Caleb grunted, shrugging off the grip, continuing compressions. 26, 27, 28. Sir, I'm ordering you to stop. 2 hands now, both shoulders, pulling harder. Let him work, Patricia's voice again, desperate. The 911 operator said to continue CPR until, Ma'am, this man is unauthorized personnel and he is physically assaulting Ms. Ashford. Caleb lost count. Started over. 1, 2, 3. The hands on his shoulders tightened, beginning to drag him backward. He leaned forward, putting his full weight into the compressions, fighting to maintain position. If you pull him away, she dies. Patricia Chen stepped between Caleb and the security guard, her small frame rigid with fury. Is that what you want? Is that what anyone in this room wants? The guard hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, Caleb completed another cycle. 30 compressions, moved to give breaths. And Vivian coughed. It was a wet, rattling sound followed by a gasp. Her chest expanded on its own, drawing air, and her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. Another cough, harder this time, and she rolled slightly onto her side, drawing in ragged breaths. She's breathing, Patricia said, her voice breaking on the words. Oh, thank God, she's breathing. Caleb sat back on his heels, his hands shaking, his uniform soaked with sweat. Relief flooded through him so intensely it felt like its own kind of shock. Vivian's eyes moved, trying to focus, her hand coming up to her chest. She was breathing, conscious, alive. The security guard's hands were still on Caleb's shoulders, but the pressure had changed, no longer pulling, just holding. Everyone in the room seemed frozen, watching Vivian gasp and cough and slowly return to consciousness. Then Grant Hollowell spoke. Get him out of here. Caleb's head snapped up. Hollowell stood over them, his face twisted with something that looked less like relief and more like disgust. Sir? The security guard sounded confused. I said get him out of here. Hollowell gestured sharply toward Caleb. Remove him from this floor immediately, and someone get a blanket or something to cover Ms. Ashford. She's been exposed. Exposed? Patricia stared at him. He saved her life. He put his mouth on her without consent, Hollowell said coldly. That's assault, and I want him removed from this building and his employment terminated immediately. The room erupted again, voices overlapping, some agreeing with Hollowell, others protesting, most just shocked into confused silence. Caleb felt the security guard's grip tighten again, beginning to pull him to his feet. He didn't resist. His legs felt like water, his hands still trembling, his mind trying to process what had just happened. He'd saved her life, hadn't he? Vivian was still on the floor, Patricia Chen kneeling beside her, talking to the 911 operator and stroking Vivian's hair. Vivian's eyes had cleared slightly, and they moved past Patricia, past the cluster of executives, landing on Caleb as the security guard hauled him toward the door. Their eyes met for one moment. Caleb couldn't read what he saw there. Confusion, certainly. Maybe fear. Maybe something else he couldn't name. Then the guard pulled him through the doorway, and Vivian Ashford disappeared from view. The security office was small, windowless, and smelled faintly of old coffee and cleaning solution. Caleb sat in a plastic chair while two guards, the one who'd pulled him from the boardroom and his supervisor, stood by the door, speaking in low voices. Caleb's uniform was still damp with sweat, his hands still shaking slightly. He clasped them together in his lap and tried to breathe steadily. This couldn't be happening. He'd saved her life. He knew CPR. He'd acted when no one else would. He'd done everything right. Rodriguez's training had been clear, precise, exactly the protocol for cardiac arrest. Vivian Ashford had stopped breathing. Her heart had stopped. And now she was alive. Because of him. So why did he feel like a criminal? The supervisor's radio crackled. He lifted it to his ear, listened, then nodded. Both guards turned toward Caleb. "Mr. Mercer," the supervisor said, his voice professionally neutral, "your contract supervisor has been notified. You're to gather your personal belongings and leave the building immediately. Your access badge will be deactivated effective now." "What?" Caleb stood, his legs suddenly steady again. "I haven't done anything wrong. That woman was dying." "The incident is under investigation," the supervisor continued, as if Caleb hadn't spoken. "You'll be contacted by your contract company regarding your employment status. Until then, you are not to return to this building or any Ashford Industries property. Is that clear?" "This is insane." Caleb's voice came out harder than he intended. "I performed CPR. That's not assault. That's emergency medical care. There are laws." "Mr. Mercer." The supervisor's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened fractionally. "I'm just following orders. The best thing you can do right now is cooperate. Gather your things. Go home. Let the lawyer sort it out." Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to demand to speak to someone with actual authority, someone who could explain how saving a life had turned into a crime. But he'd learned a long time ago that arguing with security guards and cops and anyone else with a uniform and a set of rules never worked out well for people like him. People who cleaned floors and lived in Kensington and had histories that could be weaponized the moment someone decided to look. So he nodded. They escorted him to his locker in the basement, watched as he collected his jacket and his battered backpack, then walked him to the employee exit. The night air hit him like cold water, and for a moment Caleb just stood on the sidewalk, staring at the gleaming Ashford Industries tower rising into the dark sky above him. Somewhere up there, Vivian Ashford was probably being loaded into an ambulance, being cared for by professionals with credentials and authority and the right to touch her without permission. She would recover, most likely, go back to her corner office and her presentations and her world that existed 42 floors above the people who cleaned it. And Caleb would go back to Kensington, to the apartment where Sadie was probably already asleep, where Mrs. Pike would want to know why he was home early. He'd have to explain that he'd lost his job. Again. Would have to figure out how to pay rent with the last of their savings. Would have to face his daughter and explain why Daddy couldn't keep work, why they might have to move again, why the world kept treating them like they didn't deserve stability. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from Mrs. Pike. "Sadie's asleep. Take your time. Everything okay?" Caleb typed back. "On my way home. Long story." He started walking toward the subway station, his legs moving on autopilot while his mind spun. Maybe it would be fine. Maybe once everything got sorted out, once someone reviewed what actually happened, they'd realize he'd done the right thing. Maybe Patricia Chen, who'd defended him, would speak up. Maybe Vivian Ashford herself would explain that he'd saved her life. Maybe. But Caleb had learned not to count on maybe. Maybe was for people with resources and connections and the benefit of the doubt. People like him got certainty, the certainty that when you ended up in a room where you didn't belong, touching someone you had no business touching, the system would find a way to make you pay for it. The subway platform was nearly empty at this hour. Caleb leaned against a pillar and closed his eyes, trying to will away the image of Vivian Ashford's blue lips, her chest not moving, the terrible stillness of death arriving in a room full of people who were too shocked or too scared to do anything about it. He'd done the right thing. He knew he'd done the right thing. He just hoped that would be enough. Caleb's apartment in Kensington occupied the second floor of a narrow brick building that had seen better decades. The stairs creaked under his weight, and the hallway always smelled faintly of Mrs. Pike's cooking from next door. Tonight it was something with onions and garlic that made Caleb's stomach remind him he'd skipped dinner. The night shift paid a differential, but it also meant eating at weird hours and missing meals when things got busy. He let himself in quietly, careful not to wake Sadie. The apartment was small, one bedroom that Sadie claimed, a living room where Caleb slept on a pull-out couch, a kitchen barely big enough to turn around in, and a bathroom with perpetually dripping pipes the landlord kept promising to fix. But it was clean, and it was theirs. And most importantly, it was in the school district where Sadie had finally, after 3 moves in 2 years, made actual friends. Mrs. Pike had left a plate covered in foil on the counter with a note, for later. "Don't skip meals, Caleb. You're too thin." He smiled despite everything and peeked under the foil. Chicken and rice and green beans still warm. Mrs. Pike, 73 and widowed for a decade, had appointed herself Sadie's surrogate grandmother and Caleb's surrogate mother within a week of them moving in. She watched Sadie during Caleb's night shifts, refused to take payment beyond occasional help with her groceries, and had opinions about everything from Caleb's eating habits to Sadie's bedtime. She was, in short, a lifeline. Caleb ate standing at the counter, too wound up to sit, replaying the evening over and over. Had he done something wrong? He ran through the CPR steps again in his mind. Check for responsiveness. Call 911. Check for pulse and breathing. If no pulse and no breathing, begin compressions. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. Continue until the person responds or professional help arrives. He'd followed every step. So why did he feel like he'd committed a crime? His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is David Zhang, contract supervisor. Need to speak ASAP. Call me." Caleb's stomach dropped. He glanced toward Sadie's bedroom, door still closed, no sound, then stepped into the bathroom and closed the door before dialing. Zhang picked up on the first ring. "Caleb? Thanks for calling back." Zhang's voice was carefully neutral, the tone of someone delivering bad news professionally. "I'm sure you can guess why I'm calling." "The Ashford thing," Caleb said. "Yeah, the Ashford thing." A long exhale. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you. They want you gone. Not just from that building, from the entire contract. And they're putting pressure on us to terminate your employment completely. For saving someone's life." Zhang paused. "That's not how they're framing it, Caleb. They're saying you assaulted a senior executive. That you took advantage of a medical emergency to make inappropriate physical contact." Caleb's grip on the phone tightened. "That's not what happened. I believe you, but it doesn't matter what I believe. Ashford Industries is our largest client. If they want you gone, you're gone. I'm sorry. So I'm fired." Another pause. "I'm suspending you pending investigation, which means you're not fired yet, but..." Zhang let the implication hang. "I'll do what I can, Caleb. I'll make sure the incident report includes your side. But I'm not going to lie to you. This doesn't look good." "When will I know?" "Few days, probably. I'll call as soon as I hear anything." After Zhang hung up, Caleb sat on the edge of the bathtub and let his head drop into his hands. Suspended. Which was corporate speak for fired, but with extra steps. And even if by some miracle they decided to keep him on, he'd just be reassigned to a different location, probably farther away. Definitely with worse hours, certainly under a cloud of suspicion. He was 34 years old. He had a high school diploma, a GED from prison education classes, a record of assault and battery from when he was 19 and stupid, and a 2-year gap in his employment history while Elena was sick and then gone. He'd fought for every legitimate job he'd had since getting out, had done everything right, had kept his head down and his mouth shut and his hands clean. And it still wasn't enough. A soft knock on the bathroom door. "Daddy?" Caleb's head snapped up. He wiped his face quickly. When had he started crying? And opened the door. Sadie stood in the hallway in her unicorn pajamas, her dark hair tangled from sleep, her eyes worried. "Hey, baby girl, what are you doing up?" "I heard you come home. You're home early." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his stomach. "Are you okay? You sound sad." Caleb pulled her close, one hand stroking her hair. How did kids always know? How did they sense things adults worked so hard to hide? "I'm okay," he lied. "Just a long night at work." "Did something bad happen?" Caleb hesitated. Sadie was 7. She didn't need to know about corporate politics and false accusations and the way the world could punish you for doing the right thing. But she was also smart, perceptive, and she'd been through enough loss already. She deserved truth, even if it was a simplified version. "Something happened at work," he said carefully. "Someone got hurt, and I helped them. But some people think I shouldn't have helped, so I might not be working at that building anymore." Sadie pulled back to look up at him. "You helped someone who was hurt? Like a superhero?" Despite everything, Caleb smiled. "Not like a superhero, just like someone who knew CPR." "What's CPR?" "It's a way to help someone whose heart stops. You push on their chest and breathe for them until their heart starts again." "And you saved them?" "Yeah, baby, I saved them." "Then those people are dumb." Sadie's expression turned fierce, protective in a way that made Caleb's chest ache. "You did the right thing. You always do the right thing. They should give you a medal, not be mean to you." "That's not how the world works, sweet girl." "Then the world is wrong." She hugged him again. "Can I stay home from school tomorrow and help you feel better?" "Absolutely not. You have that math test, remember? And Mrs. Rodriguez will be sad if you miss library day." "But you're sad." "I'm okay, Sadie. I promise." He kissed the top of her head. "Come on, let's get you back to bed." He tucked her in, read 3 pages from the chapter book they were working through together, something about dragons and magical forests, and waited until her breathing evened out into sleep. Then he went back to the living room, pulled out his laptop, and did something he'd been avoiding. He Googled Vivian Ashford. The results were extensive. She'd taken over Ashford Industries at 24 after her father Thomas Ashford died in a car accident, and in the 14 years since, she'd grown the company's portfolio by 200%. She was known for being ruthless in business, charitable in public, and intensely private in personal matters. There were photos of her at various charity galas and industry events, always perfectly composed, always surrounded by the right people. There were puff pieces about her success, think pieces about women in leadership, critical articles about her aggressive acquisition strategies. There was nothing that suggested she was a bad person. Nothing that suggested she was a good one either. Just a woman who existed in a different universe than Caleb, one where power and money and connections created a buffer between her and the kind of consequences ordinary people faced every day. She'd probably never even remember his face. He was just the janitor who happened to know CPR, a momentary inconvenience in her story, a problem her people would handle so she didn't have to think about it. Caleb closed the laptop. Tomorrow he'd need to start looking for new work. He'd hit up the temp agencies, check the listings for overnight warehouse positions, maybe see if any of the restaurants near Sadie's school were hiring dishwashers. Something, anything, that would keep the lights on and food in the fridge and Sadie in the apartment where she'd finally made friends. But tonight, he let himself sit in the dark and feel the unfairness of it all. He'd saved a life. He'd done exactly what he'd been trained to do, what every CPR instructor said you should do, what any decent human being would do when confronted with another human being dying right in front of them. And the reward was losing everything. Again. 3 days after the incident, Caleb's phone was silent. No call from David John. No update on the investigation. No word on when or if he'd be cleared to return to work. The money in his checking account continued its steady decline toward zero, and the rent, due in 9 days, loomed larger every time he looked at his bank balance. He'd applied to 17 jobs. 3 had rejected him outright. 14 hadn't responded. Sadie asked him twice more about what happened, and each time he gave her the same simplified version. He'd helped someone. Some people didn't understand. It would work out. She seemed to accept this, or at least she stopped asking, which wasn't quite the same thing. Mrs. Pike asked once, her eyes sharp with concern, and when Caleb gave her the abbreviated story, she'd pursed her lips and muttered something in Korean that he suspected was very unflattering toward his former employers. On the 3rd day, Mrs. Pike knocked on his door at 10 in the morning with her phone in hand and an expression that made Caleb's stomach drop before she even spoke. "Caleb," she said, "you need to see this." She turned the phone toward him. A video was playing, shaky phone camera footage of the Ashford Industries boardroom, clearly taken by someone who'd been in the room that night. The angle was weird, shot from near the conference table, but it showed enough. It showed Caleb on his knees beside Vivian Ashford's still form. It showed him performing chest compressions. It showed him tilting her head back, pinching her nose, and placing his mouth over hers to give rescue breaths. But the caption made everything worse. Janitor caught kissing unconscious CEO Ashford Industries Security. Investigating disturbing incident. The video had been posted to a local news blog. It had already been shared 400 times. Caleb took misses. Pike's phone with numb fingers and scrolled through the comments. This is assault. Fire him immediately. Taking advantage of someone helpless is disgusting. This is why we need better background checks. Typical. Give these people an inch and they take a mile. What was he even doing in an executive boardroom? There were a few defenders, people pointing out that it was clearly CPR, that the man had saved her life, but they were drowned out by the torrent of judgment and disgust. Someone had identified the cleaning company. Someone else had posted a screenshot of Caleb's LinkedIn profile. Sparse, outdated, but with his full name and photo. His phone started ringing. Unknown number. He declined the call. It immediately rang again. Different number. He declined that too. Caleb, Mrs. Pike said gently, "What's happening?" "I don't know." His voice sounded distant, strange. "I did CPR, that's all. I just did CPR." The phone rang again. This time he answered. "Is this Caleb Mercer?" A woman's voice, bright and eager. "Who is this?" "Rachel Kim from Channel 6 News. I'm doing a story on the incident at Ashford Industries, and I'd love to get your perspective. Can you comment on the video that's circulating?" "No comment." Caleb hung up. Immediately, another call. Another reporter. He declined it. Then another and another. He turned his phone off. "You need a lawyer," Mrs. Pike said. "I can't afford a lawyer." "Then you need to talk to someone." "The police? A union." "I'm not in a union. And the police..." Caleb laughed, sharp and bitter. "The police aren't going to help someone like me, Mrs. Pike. I have a record. The second anyone digs into my history, this stops being about CPR and starts being about what I did when I was 19 and stupid." She didn't argue, probably because she knew he was right. Instead, she squeezed his arm and said, "Sadie can stay with me as long as you need. Don't worry about her." "Thank you." After Mrs. Pike left, Caleb sat on the couch and forced himself to turn his phone back on. The voicemails were piling up. Reporters, all of them, asking for interviews or statements or his side of the story, as if there were multiple sides to saving someone's life. There was one text message, though, that wasn't from a reporter. "David Zhang, I'm sorry. Corporate decided to terminate your contract effective immediately. You'll receive your final paycheck by mail. I really am sorry, Caleb." Caleb stared at the message until the screen went dark. Fired. Not suspended. Not under investigation. Just gone. He'd saved a woman's life and lost his job. He'd acted when everyone else froze, and the reward was being labeled a predator, a threat, someone who couldn't be trusted around unconscious women. The unfairness of it sat in his chest like a stone, heavy and sharp. But under the unfairness was something else, something older and more familiar. Fear. Because rent was due in 9 days, and he had exactly $600 in his bank account, and Sadie needed to eat, and the utilities needed to be paid, and the school was already asking about the field trip fee he'd promised to send in by the end of the month. Because he'd already been rejected from 20 jobs this week, and now there was a video of him circulating online, and if potential employers Googled his name, they'd find that video before they found his resume. Because people like him, people with records, people without college degrees, people who lived paycheck to paycheck and cleaned offices for a living, didn't get second chances when things went wrong. They got buried. Caleb picked up his phone and started searching again. Job listings, anything. Warehouse work, retail, fast food. He'd take anything at this point. But first, he had to pick Sadie up from school in 3 hours. He had to smile and ask about her day and pretend everything was fine. He had to be her father first, her provider second, and his own person somewhere distant third. He could fall apart later. Right now, he had to keep moving. By day 5, the story had metastasized. What started as a local news blog post had been picked up by larger outlets. Philadelphia Inquirer ran a story. Questions raised over incident at Ashford Industries. Philadelphia Magazine published an opinion piece. When help crosses the line, the complicated ethics of workplace emergency response. A local TV station did a 3-minute segment featuring Grant Hollowell, professional, grave, speaking in careful corporate-approved language about ongoing internal review and commitment to employee safety. Vivian Ashford wasn't mentioned by name in most stories, protected by HIPAA and corporate lawyers. But everyone knew who the CEO was, and everyone had an opinion about what Caleb should or shouldn't have done. The worst part was the job applications. Caleb had expanded his search radius, was applying to places as far as an hour away by public transit. But now when potential employers Googled his name, and they all Googled names, they found the video, the articles, the speculation. 3 places that had initially contacted him for interviews suddenly stopped responding. One sent a terse email. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates." Caleb kept applying anyway. What else could he do? Sadie's school had started sending reminder emails about unpaid lunch fees. The electricity bill sat on the counter, bright red final notice stamped across the top. Mrs. Pike had quietly left groceries by his door twice, things she claimed she'd overpurchased and couldn't use before they went bad. He knew she was lying. He accepted them anyway because Sadie needed to eat. The shame of it was almost worse than the fear. On day 6, Caleb woke up feeling wrong. His head ached, his body felt too hot and too cold simultaneously, and when he tried to get up to check on Sadie, the room tilted sideways. He made it to her bedroom door and found her already dressed, reading on her bed. "Morning, baby girl," he managed. She looked up, and her face immediately creased with worry. "Daddy, you look sick." "I'm fine, just tired. Let's get you breakfast." But in the kitchen, making toast felt like an impossible task. His hands shook. The light from the window stabbed into his eyes. He managed to get food in front of Sadie and sat across from her, trying to look normal, trying to be present. "Are you sure you're okay?" Sadie asked. "Yeah, just need coffee." After he walked Sadie to school, moving slowly, breathing carefully, he came back to the apartment and collapsed on the couch, just for a minute, just to rest his eyes. He woke up 5 hours later, disoriented and feverish. The clock said it was past 1 in the afternoon. He'd missed... What had he missed? He checked his phone. 2 missed calls from numbers he didn't recognize, more voicemails from reporters, and 1 text from Sadie's school. Reminder: early dismissal today at 2:15 p.m. Early dismissal. He'd forgotten. He had 45 minutes to get there. Caleb pulled himself upright, and the room spun. Fever. Definitely fever. When had he last eaten? Yesterday? The day before? Time had started blurring, hours and days smearing together. He made it to the bathroom, splashed cold water on his face, and studied his reflection. He looked awful, eyes sunken, skin pale, dark circles that could have been bruises. When had he started looking like this? The walk to Sadie's school took twice as long as usual. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else, and he had to stop twice to lean against buildings until the dizziness passed. But he made it. He stood with the other parents in the pickup area and waited for Sadie to emerge. When she did, her face brightened momentarily before concern took over. She ran to him and grabbed his hand. "Daddy, you're really hot." "I'm okay." "You're not okay. You have a fever. We learned about fevers in health class. You need to go to the doctor." "Can't afford the doctor right now, baby. I just need to rest." They walked home slowly. Sadie chattered about her day, something about a science project, something about her friend Emma getting in trouble for talking during quiet reading, but Caleb could barely track the words. Everything sounded distant, like he was underwater. At the apartment, he collapsed on the couch again. Sadie brought him water and made herself a snack, crackers with peanut butter, which she was allowed to make on her own. She curled up next to him with a book. "I'm taking care of you now," she announced. Caleb wanted to protest, wanted to say that it wasn't her job to take care of him, that he was the parent and she was the child. But he couldn't find the energy, so he just pulled her close and closed his eyes. He woke up in darkness. His phone said it was 3 in the morning. Sadie was asleep beside him, her small body warm against his side. Someone had covered them both with a blanket. Mrs. Pike, probably, letting herself in with the spare key they'd given her. Caleb tried to get up and immediately regretted it. The fever had gotten worse. Or maybe it had always been this bad, and he'd just been ignoring it. His whole body ached, his throat felt like sandpaper, and when he tried to remember the last time he'd eaten a full meal, he couldn't. He made it to the kitchen, drank water directly from the tap, and checked the fridge. Nearly empty. Milk that was a day past its expiration. Some of Mrs. Pike's leftovers. A few slices of cheese. Half a loaf of bread. Not enough. Never enough. Caleb's phone buzzed. A text from David Jang. Saw the news stories. "I'm really sorry, man. If there's anything I can do to help." There wasn't. Unless Zhang had a time machine or a spare $10,000 or a way to make the entire internet forget the last week had happened, there was nothing anyone could do to help. Caleb went back to the couch and lay down. Sadie stirred, mumbled something incoherent, then settled back into sleep. He watched her breathe, even, peaceful, trusting that when she woke up, her father would still be there, still taking care of things, still keeping their small world from falling apart. He couldn't let her down. Whatever happened, he couldn't let her down. But as the fever burned through him and the darkness pressed in from all sides, Caleb felt the edges of that promise starting to fray. He was one person, one broke, sick, desperate person trying to hold together a life that had been fragile to begin with. How much more could he take before everything finally, completely broke? He closed his eyes and tried not to think about the answer. Because the answer, he suspected, was not much more. The fever didn't break. If anything, it dug deeper, settling into Caleb's bones like winter cold that no amount of blankets could chase away. By day 7, he'd stopped trying to pretend he was functional. He'd wake up disoriented, his sheets soaked with sweat, and have to remind himself where he was and why everything hurt. Sadie had become disturbingly competent at taking care of herself. She made her own breakfast, cereal and milk, carefully measured. She got herself dressed for school, checked her homework, packed her backpack. She'd stand by the couch where Caleb had more or less taken up permanent residence and touch his forehead with her small hand, her face grave. "You're still hot, Daddy." "I know, baby. I'll be okay." "You need medicine." "Can't take medicine on an empty stomach." Which was true, and also a convenient excuse for why he wasn't taking the ibuprofen that might have helped. Because his stomach had been mostly empty for 3 days now, and the thought of food made his nausea worse. Mrs. Pike came by twice a day, morning and evening, bringing soup that Caleb tried to eat and mostly couldn't, checking on both of them with increasing concern written across her weathered features. On day 8, she sat down across from him and spoke in the no-nonsense tone that meant she wasn't asking. "Caleb, you need to see a doctor." "Can't afford it." "Then you go to the emergency room. They have to treat you." "And then I get a bill for $2,000 that I definitely can't afford." Caleb's voice came out rougher than he intended. "I just need to rest. It'll pass." "You're getting worse, not better. And Sadie," Mrs. Pike's voice softened. "Caleb, she's scared. She won't say it, but I can see it. She thinks you're dying." The words hit harder than they should have. Caleb closed his eyes, fighting against the shame and helplessness that threatened to overwhelm him. "I'm not dying. It's just a virus or something. My immune system's shot because I haven't been eating right, and I'm stressed, and—" He stopped. Making excuses didn't change anything. "Let me call someone," Mrs. Pike said. "My nephew is a doctor. He might—" "No." Caleb forced himself to sit up, even though the movement made the room tilt. "I appreciate it, Mrs. Pike, really, but I just need to sleep it off. I'll be fine in a few days." He could see she didn't believe him. He didn't believe himself. But what choice did he have? Medical bills meant debt, meant collectors, meant another black mark on a credit report that was already more red than black. And if he ended up hospitalized, who would take care of Sadie? Mrs. Pike was wonderful, but she was 73 with arthritis and her own health problems. She couldn't take on a 7-year-old full-time. After Mrs. Pike left, Caleb tried to pull himself together. He made it to the bathroom, splashed water on his face, studied his reflection. He looked like a corpse. Skin waxy and gray, eyes unfocused, lips cracked from dehydration. When had this happened? When had he gone from barely managing to actively falling apart? His phone buzzed. Another unknown number. He'd stopped answering days ago, but morbid curiosity made him check the voicemail. Mr. Mercer, this is Jennifer Walsh from Philadelphia Tribune. I'm following up on the Ashford Industries incident and wanted to offer you the opportunity to tell your side of the story. We're planning to run a feature this weekend about workplace emergency response, and your perspective would be... Caleb deleted it halfway through. His side of the story. As if there were multiple sides to saving someone's life. As if the narrative needed balancing. He stumbled back to the couch and pulled out his laptop, opening it with shaking hands. Maybe there was something he'd missed, some job listing he'd overlooked, some opportunity that didn't require Googling his name. The search results for Caleb Mercer Philadelphia had gotten worse. The video was everywhere now, reposted, commented on, dissected. Someone had created a Reddit thread titled Janitor Saves CEO or Assaults Her, You Decide, with hundreds of comments arguing both sides. Someone else had found his criminal record and posted screenshots. Assault and battery, age 19, sentenced to 18 months. The context, defending his girlfriend from her abusive ex, taking things too far, spending a year and a half learning that the justice system didn't care about context, was absent. Just the conviction. Just the proof that he was exactly the kind of person who couldn't be trusted. Caleb closed the laptop before he could read more. His phone rang again. This time the caller ID showed a name he recognized, Patricia Chen. He answered. Mr. Mercer? Her voice was crisp, professional. This is Patricia Chen from Ashford Industries Legal. We met briefly on the night of the incident. I remember. How could he forget? She'd been the only one defending him while everyone else debated whether to call security or an ambulance first. I wanted to reach out personally, Patricia continued. I've been reviewing the incident, and I believe there's been a significant miscarriage of justice in how this was handled. However, I need to be clear that I'm calling in a personal capacity, not as a representative of Ashford Industries. The company's official position remains that you violated protocol by entering the boardroom and making physical contact with Ms. Ashford. Protocol? Caleb laughed, sharp and bitter. There's a protocol for watching someone die? I understand your frustration. And for what it's worth, I agree with you. What you did was heroic, and the response has been unconscionable. Patricia paused. That said, I'm calling because I think you should know that Ms. Ashford is trying to find you. Caleb's fever-fogged brain took a moment to process that. What? She woke up in the hospital with fragmented memories of that night. She's been asking questions about what happened, who helped her, why there's a security investigation. The executive team has been managing the information she receives, but she's persistent, and she started demanding answers. So what do you want me to do about it? Nothing, necessarily. I just thought you should know that the situation is more complex than it appears. Ms. Ashford isn't the enemy here, Mr. Mercer. If anything, she's as much a victim of corporate politics as you are. She's a billionaire who runs the company, Caleb said flatly. I'm a janitor who got fired for saving her life. We're not the same kind of victim. Fair point? Patricia's voice softened. Look, I shouldn't even be making this call. If anyone finds out I contacted you directly, it could cost me my position. But I watched what happened that night, and I can't let it stand without at least trying to help. If you decide you want to fight this, legally, let me know. I have documentation, video footage, witness statements, evidence that what you did was textbook emergency response. I can't afford a lawyer. There are organizations that take these kinds of cases pro bono, wrongful termination, defamation, civil rights violations. I can make some calls if you're interested. Caleb wanted to say yes, wanted to fight back, to clear his name, to make someone acknowledge that he'd done the right thing. But fighting required energy he didn't have and time he couldn't spare, and hope he'd run out of somewhere around day 3 of this nightmare. I appreciate the offer, he said carefully. But right now, I just need to focus on keeping my daughter fed and my lights on. The rest of it, I can't think about the rest of it. I understand. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Mr. Mercer, are you all right? You sound unwell. I'm fine. You don't sound fine. I said I'm fine. The words came out harsher than intended. Caleb took a breath, tried to soften his tone. Thank you for calling, Ms. Chen. I mean that. But I need to go. He hung up before she could respond. The effort of the conversation left him exhausted. He lay back down, pulling the blanket up even though he was burning with fever. The apartment was too quiet. Sadie wouldn't be home from school for another 2 hours, and the silence pressed in from all sides, heavy and suffocating. Caleb closed his eyes and let himself drift. Somewhere in the haze of fever and exhaustion, he dreamed about the boardroom, about Vivian Ashford's blue lips and still chest. But in the dream, when he started CPR, his hands went right through her body like she was made of smoke. He kept trying, kept pushing down on emptiness, while voices around him shouted that he was doing it wrong, that he was making it worse, that he should stop before he hurt someone. He woke up gasping, disoriented, his heart racing. The light coming through the window had changed. Late afternoon, probably close to when Sadie would get home. He needed to pull himself together, needed to at least look functional when she walked through the door. But when he tried to stand, his legs buckled. He caught himself on the arm of the couch, breathing hard, waiting for the dizziness to pass. It didn't pass. It just settled into a constant, low-level vertigo that made the whole room feel tilted. The door opened. Sadie. She took one look at him, and her backpack hit the floor. "Daddy!" "I'm okay, baby." Just stood up too fast. But he wasn't okay, and they both knew it. Sadie ran to him, her small hands gripping his arms, trying to steady him. She was 7 years old and trying to keep her father from collapsing, and the wrongness of it made Caleb want to scream. "Sit down," Sadie ordered, her voice shaking. "Sit down right now." He sat. Sadie disappeared into the kitchen and came back with water, which she pressed into his hands and watched until he drank. Then she stood in front of him, her arms crossed, looking so much like Elena in that moment that Caleb's chest ached. "You need a doctor," she said. "You need a doctor right now." "Sadie, no." Her voice was fierce, tears starting to well in her eyes. "No more saying you're fine. You're not fine. You're really sick and you're scaring me, and I don't know what to do." The tears started falling then, and Caleb pulled her close, holding her while she cried against his shoulder. He wanted to promise her it would be okay, wanted to say all the things parents are supposed to say to make their children feel safe. But the words stuck in his throat because he didn't know if it would be okay. He didn't know if he could keep protecting her from a world that seemed determined to grind them both into dust. "I'm sorry," he whispered into her hair. "I'm so sorry, baby." A knock on the door. Mrs. Pike's voice. "Caleb? Sadie? Can I come in?" Sadie pulled away and ran to open the door. Mrs. Pike took one look at the scene. Caleb slumped on the couch, Sadie's tear-streaked face, and her expression hardened with determination. "That's it," she said. "I'm calling an ambulance." "Mrs. Pike, please, no arguments." She already had her phone out. "You can barely stand, Caleb. You're severely dehydrated at minimum, probably have an infection, and you need medical attention whether you can afford it or not. Sadie shouldn't have to watch her father deteriorate because he's too stubborn to get help." The words stung because they were true. Caleb opened his mouth to protest again, but before he could, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him look at the screen, and the caller ID showed Ashford Industries, Executive Office. His thumb moved before his brain caught up, accepting the call. "Hello? Is this Caleb Mercer?" A woman's voice, unfamiliar, cool, and professional. "Yes." "Please hold for Ms. Ashford." The line went silent. Caleb stared at his phone, confused. Then another voice came on, stronger, more direct, carrying an authority that even through the phone line made something in Caleb's spine straighten. "Mr. Mercer, this is Vivian Ashford." For a moment, Caleb couldn't speak. The woman whose life he'd saved, the woman whose company had destroyed him, the woman who existed in a completely different universe than the one where he was currently sitting in a cramped apartment trying not to pass out in front of his terrified daughter. "I'm here," he managed. "I've been trying to reach you for 3 days," Vivian said. Her voice was clipped, precise, but underneath Caleb heard something else. Urgency, maybe, or anger. "I only just obtained your contact information this afternoon after considerable effort. The people around me have been remarkably resistant to connecting us. Ms. Ashford, I don't think we should be talking. Your lawyers can go to hell." The words came out sharp enough to cut. "Mr. Mercer, I've spent the last week piecing together what happened the night I collapsed. I've reviewed security footage. I've read incident reports. I've spoken with witnesses. And I've discovered that while I was unconscious in a hospital bed, my company systematically destroyed the reputation and livelihood of the only person in that boardroom who had the courage and competence to save my life. Caleb's hand tightened on the phone. Why are you calling me? Because I want to fix this. Because what was done to you is unconscionable, and I won't allow it to stand. She paused. Mr. Mercer, are you still there? I'm here. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. The room was tilting again, and he could see Mrs. Pike watching him with concern while Sadie hovered nearby. I'd like to meet with you, Vivian continued. Tomorrow, if possible. My office, or somewhere neutral if you'd prefer. I want to hear your account of what happened, and I want to discuss how to make this right. I don't... Caleb stopped, started again. Ms. Ashford, I appreciate the call, but I can't meet tomorrow. I'm not well. Not well how? It doesn't matter. Mr. Mercer. Her tone shifted, becoming somehow both softer and more commanding. I've been where you are. Not financially, I'll grant you that. But I know what it's like to have your world collapse while everyone around you moves on like nothing happened. I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning and no one's throwing you a line. So please, tell me what's wrong. Maybe it was the fever, maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was just that Caleb had reached the point where he had nothing left to lose. Whatever the reason, the truth came spilling out. I haven't been able to keep food down in 3 days. I have a fever that won't break. I'm too dizzy to stand for more than a few minutes at a time. I have $600 to my name, rent due in 2 days, and I can't get a job because when people Google my name, they find a video of me supposedly assaulting you. So no, Ms. Ashford, I can't meet tomorrow. I can barely make it to the bathroom. Silence on the other end of the line. Caleb waited for her to make excuses and hang up, to retreat back to her world where problems could be solved by throwing money or lawyers at them. Instead, she said, "What's your address?" "What?" "Your address, Mr. Mercer. Where do you live?" "I don't think I'm sending a car. No, I'm coming myself, with a doctor. You're getting medical attention whether you like it or not, and then we're going to have a very serious conversation about what happens next." Her voice softened fractionally. "You saved my life. The least I can do is make sure you're still alive to regret it." Despite everything, the fever, the fear, the crushing weight of the last week, Caleb felt something crack open in his chest. It might have been hope, or it might have been the last of his resistance finally breaking. He gave her the address. After he hung up, Mrs. Pike and Sadie were both staring at him. "Who was that?" Sadie asked. "The woman I helped. She's coming here." "The CEO?" Mrs. Pike's eyebrows rose. "The one who got you fired? She says she didn't know what they did. She says she wants to fix it." "And you believe her?" Caleb looked down at his hands, still trembling slightly. "I don't know. But right now, I don't have the luxury of being skeptical." 45 minutes later, a black town car pulled up outside the building. Caleb watched from the window as Vivian Ashford stepped out, followed by a man carrying a medical bag. She was dressed more casually than in the boardroom. Dark jeans, a charcoal sweater, minimal jewelry. But she still carried herself like someone used to walking into rooms and having them rearrange themselves around her presence. Mrs. Pike answered the door. Caleb heard low voices in the hallway. Mrs. Pike's tone protective and wary, Vivian's calm and apologetic. Then footsteps, and suddenly Vivian Ashford was standing in his living room, looking around at the cramped space with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read. Their eyes met. Up close, she looked different than he remembered. Thinner. There were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and a healing bruise on her temple that suggested she'd hit the floor harder than he'd realized when she collapsed. She looked, in short, like someone who'd recently had their heart stop and been brought back from the edge. "Mr. Mercer," she said quietly. "Ms. Ashford." The man with the medical bag stepped forward. "I'm Dr. Raymond Chen. Ms. Ashford asked me to examine you. With your permission?" Caleb wanted to refuse, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity and privacy. But Sadie was watching from the kitchen doorway with wide, hopeful eyes, and Mrs. Pike was giving him a look that said she'd physically drag him to the doctor if necessary. "Fine," he said. What followed was 15 minutes of quiet humiliation as Dr. Chen checked his temperature, blood pressure, and oxygen levels, listened to his heart and lungs, examined his throat and eyes, and asked pointed questions about his symptoms. Vivian stood to the side, her attention seemingly focused on the bookshelf where Sadie's school pictures and Caleb's modest collection of paperbacks competed for space. Severe dehydration, Dr. Chen finally announced. Malnutrition, viral infection, likely secondary to your weakened immune system. You need IV fluids, antibiotics, and at least 72 hours of bed rest with proper nutrition. I can't afford, Caleb started. It's covered, Vivian interrupted. All of it. Doctor's fees, medications, whatever you need. I don't want your charity. She turned to face him fully, and something in her expression made Caleb's protest die in his throat. This isn't charity, Mr. Mercer. This is me preventing the man who saved my life from dying because my company's negligence and cruelty put him in an impossible situation. So you're going to accept the help. You're going to get better. And then we're going to have a conversation about how to burn down the system that did this to you. Are we clear? There was steel in her voice, and underneath it, something else. Something that looked like guilt. Caleb nodded. Dr. Chen set up an IV, the needle sliding into Caleb's arm with practiced ease. Cool saline began flowing into his veins, and within minutes he could feel the difference, the fog in his head clearing slightly, his heart rate steadying. It was remarkable how quickly the body responded to getting what it actually needed. Sadie crept closer, watching the IV bag with fascination. Is my daddy going to be okay? Dr. Chen smiled at her. He's going to be fine. He just needs rest and fluids. Can you make sure he drinks lots of water over the next few days? I can do that. Sadie's voice was fierce with determination. I'm good at taking care of him. I can see that, Vivian said softly. She'd moved closer, and now she crouched down to Sadie's eye level. You must be very brave. Sadie studied her with the frank assessment only children can manage. You're the lady my daddy saved. I am. He got in trouble for saving you. That wasn't fair. No, Vivian agreed. It wasn't fair at all. And I'm going to fix it. How? I'm still working that out. But I promise you, your father is never going to be in trouble for doing the right thing again. Not if I have anything to say about it. Sadie seemed to consider this, then nodded. Okay. But he still needs to rest. He's been really sick. I understand, and we won't stay long, I promise. Vivian stood and looked at Caleb. Mr. Mercer, I know this isn't the time for a lengthy conversation, but I need you to know that I've spent the last 3 days unraveling what my executive team did in my name, and I'm appalled. Grant Hollowell, our CFO, made the decision to terminate your employment without consulting me. He orchestrated the narrative that you were a threat rather than a hero, and he did it because... She stopped, her jaw tightening. He did it because in his worldview, someone like you doesn't get to touch someone like me without consequences, even if touching me saved my life. The bluntness of it landed like a punch. Caleb had known, on some level, that this was about class and power and the invisible lines that separated people like him from people like her. But hearing it stated so plainly made something in his chest ache. So what now? He asked. Now, you get better. Dr. Chen will check on you daily until you're stable. I'm covering your rent for the next 3 months, so you don't have to worry about that while you recover. And once you're on your feet, you and I are going to sit down and discuss your future. My future? I owe you my life, Mr. Mercer. That's not a debt I can repay with money alone, but I can offer you something better than what you had before. Something that matters. She paused. We'll talk about specifics when you're well. For now, just focus on getting better. She moved toward the door, then stopped and turned back. Mr. Mercer? Thank you. I know that might sound inadequate given everything that's happened, but thank you for not letting me die, even knowing what it would cost you. Before Caleb could respond, she was gone, Dr. Chen following behind with promises to return the next day. The apartment felt strangely empty after they left. Caleb sat with the IV still dripping into his arm, trying to process what had just happened. Mrs. Pike bustled around making tea, and Sadie climbed onto the couch beside him, careful not to jostle the IV line. I like her, Sadie announced. She has kind eyes. You think so? Yeah. And she's sorry about what happened. I could tell. Caleb pulled Sadie close with his free arm. You're a good judge of character, baby girl. I know. She settled against his side. Are you really going to be okay now? Yeah, Caleb said, and for the first time in a week, he thought it might actually be true. Yeah, I think I am. Over the next 2 days, Caleb's world slowly righted itself. Dr. Chen came by each morning, checking vitals and adjusting medications. The antibiotics began working, the fever breaking in sweating, shivering waves that left him weak but clear-headed. Mrs. Pike brought meals, actual meals, not just scraps, and supervised as Caleb ate them, her satisfaction evident every time he cleaned his plate. And Vivian Ashford, true to her word, had paid his rent. When Caleb checked his bank account and saw the deposit, he'd had to close his eyes against the wave of relief that threatened to overwhelm him. 3 months. 3 months of not worrying about eviction, of being able to focus on recovery and job hunting without the constant panic of homelessness looming. On day 3 of recovery, Patricia Chen called. Mr. Mercer, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted you to know that Ms. Ashford has been making moves. Big moves. What kind of moves? She's ordered a full internal investigation into how the incident was handled. Grant Hollowell has been placed on administrative leave, and she's drafting a formal statement clearing your name, which she plans to release to the media along with the full security footage showing exactly what happened that night. Caleb's grip on the phone tightened. When? Within the week. She's being careful about it, making sure all the legal angles are covered, getting statements from witnesses, building an airtight case, but she's committed to setting the record straight. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know, and because... Patricia paused. Because I think she's also preparing to offer you something. I don't know what exactly, but she's been asking about your background, your skills, your interests. She's planning something. After the call, Caleb sat in the quiet apartment and tried to imagine what came next. The idea of his name being cleared felt almost too good to believe. But Vivian Ashford seemed like a woman who, once she decided on a course of action, didn't do anything halfway. He thought about her crouching down to speak to Sadie at eye level. Thought about the guilt in her expression when she talked about what had been done in her name. Thought about the way she'd stated the ugly truth about class and power without flinching from it. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. Or maybe it was just another setup for disappointment. Caleb had learned not to trust hope too easily. But as he looked around at the apartment that would be his for at least 3 more months, at Sadie doing homework at the kitchen table, at the medications lined up that would help him recover, he thought that maybe, just this once, hope might be worth the risk. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Vivian Ashford. When you're ready, I'd like to meet. On your terms, your location. Let me know. Caleb stared at the message for a long moment. Then slowly, he typed back. Next week. There's a coffee shop near my daughter's school. I'll send you the address. The response came almost immediately. I'll be there. The coffee shop was called Riverside Grounds, a small corner place 3 blocks from Sadie's school where Caleb had sometimes stopped for cheap drip coffee before his shifts. He'd chosen it deliberately, neutral territory, public but not crowded, the kind of place where a billionaire CEO and an unemployed janitor could sit across from each other without drawing too much attention. Or at least, that had been the theory. Vivian Ashford arrived exactly on time, which somehow didn't surprise Caleb. She wore dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, minimal makeup. She looked like she was trying to blend in and almost succeeding. Almost. There was something about the way she carried herself, the quality of even her casual clothes, the professional posture that spoke of boardrooms and executive decisions, even when she was ordering a latte. Caleb had arrived 15 minutes early, claimed a corner table, and nursed a black coffee while trying not to feel like he was about to interview for a job he didn't understand. He dressed in his best clothes, dark jeans without holes, a button-down shirt that Elena had bought him years ago, boots that were scuffed but clean. Sadie had inspected him that morning and declared him very handsome, which had made Mrs. Pike laugh, and Caleb's chest ache with the strange mixture of love and fear that defined single parenthood. Vivian spotted him immediately, raised a hand in acknowledgement, and made her way over after collecting her drink. Up close, she looked better than she had during her visit to his apartment. The dark circles were fading, the bruise on her temple had yellowed into the final stages of healing, and there was color in her face again. She looked alive, which made sense, Caleb supposed, since he was the reason she was still breathing. "Mr. Mercer," she set her latte down and extended her hand. "Thank you for meeting with me." "Caleb is fine." He shook her hand, noting the firm grip, the calluses that suggested she did more than just sit behind a desk. "And it's your money that's keeping my lights on right now, so I figure the least I can do is show up." Something flickered across her expression, amusement maybe, or appreciation for the directness. She sat down across from him, wrapping her hands around her cup like she needed the warmth, even though the cafe was perfectly comfortable. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Better? Dr. Chen's been thorough. The antibiotics are working, and I'm keeping food down again." Caleb paused. "Thank you for that. For all of it. The medical care, the rent. I don't know how I would have—" He stopped, not wanting to finish that sentence, not wanting to acknowledge out loud how close he'd come to complete collapse. "You don't need to thank me." Vivian's voice was quiet but firm. "What happened to you was a direct result of my company's actions. The medical care and financial support aren't generosity, Caleb. They're the bare minimum of what I owe you. Most people in your position wouldn't see it that way. Most people in my position didn't spend 3 days in a hospital room piecing together how their executive team prioritized corporate liability over basic human decency." She took a sip of her latte, her expression darkening. "I've spent the last week conducting an internal investigation. Do you want to know what I found?" "I'm not sure I want to hear it." "You should hear it. You deserve to know exactly what was done and why." Vivian leaned forward slightly. "Grant Hollowell made the decision to terminate your employment within 3 hours of the incident. He didn't consult me. I was unconscious in a hospital at the time, and he didn't wait for any kind of investigation. He saw a janitor performing CPR on a CEO and decided that the optics were unacceptable. In his words, we couldn't have the wrong kind of person being credited with saving me because it would raise questions about why executives froze while contract labor acted." The words landed like stones. Caleb had suspected something like this, but hearing it stated so baldly still made his stomach twist. The wrong kind of person. His exact phrase, which I found in an email he sent to HR and legal outlining his reasoning. Vivian's jaw tightened. He also orchestrated the leak of that video, found someone in the boardroom who'd recorded on their phone, paid them to send it to a media contact with a specific narrative attached. The janitor kissing unconscious CEO angle wasn't accidental or organic. It was manufactured. Jesus. Caleb sat back, trying to process the calculated cruelty of it. To not just fire him, but to actively destroy any chance he had of moving forward. Why? Because in Grant's worldview, people exist in a hierarchy. And when someone from the bottom dares to touch someone at the top, even to save their life, the natural order has been disrupted. So you needed to be punished, made an example of, reminded of your place. She paused. "I'm telling you this not to make excuses, but so you understand that what happened wasn't about you personally. It was about a system that Grant and others like him have spent their careers building and protecting. So what happens to him now? He's been terminated. With cause, so no golden parachute. I've also referred his actions to the State Labor Board, and am exploring whether what he did constitutes defamation or intentional infliction of emotional distress." Vivian's expression was cold, controlled. "Grant Hollowell spent 30 years at Ashford Industries. He won't work in Philadelphia again." The vindictive satisfaction Caleb felt at those words probably wasn't his best quality, but he let himself feel it anyway. And the others, the executives who just stood there? Being addressed. Some have been let go. Others are facing serious disciplinary action. I'm restructuring the entire executive floor to make it clear that this kind of behavior won't be tolerated. She met his eyes. "I can't undo what was done to you, Caleb, but I can make sure it never happens to anyone else." They sat in silence for a moment, the ambient noise of the coffee shop filling the space between them. Caleb watched Vivian trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the distant CEO he'd glimpsed in passing during his time at Ashford Industries. She seemed different here, stripped of the corporate armor. more human, more real. There's something else I wanted to discuss, Vivian said finally. Your future. I figured that was coming. I owe you my life. That's not a debt that can be settled with money or firings or public statements. I've been thinking about what I can offer you that would actually matter, that would make a real difference. Caleb's instinct was to be skeptical. Rich people always thought they could fix problems by throwing resources at them, without understanding that some problems ran deeper than money could reach. But there was something in Vivian's expression, earnestness, maybe, or genuine uncertainty, that made him hold his tongue and listen. I don't want to go back to janitorial work, Vivian continued. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but because you deserve better. You have skills, crisis management, the ability to act when others freeze, clear thinking under pressure. That's valuable. More valuable than most people realize. Those aren't exactly resume bullet points. Maybe they should be. She leaned forward. I'm creating a new position at Ashford Industries. Director of Employee Welfare. It would be your job to identify and address the needs of our workforce that fall through the cracks. The workers who can't afford childcare so they miss shifts. The ones who need emergency funds but can't access predatory lending. The ones who have skills and potential but no pathway to advancement because they don't have the right credentials or background. Caleb stared at her. You want to hire me? After what your company did? I want to hire you because of what my company did. Because you understand what it's like to be overlooked, dismissed, and punished for not fitting into the right boxes. Because you see the people everyone else ignores. Vivian's voice was intense now, passionate. I've built a successful company, Caleb, but I've also built a company that allowed someone like Grant Hollowell to operate with impunity for 3 decades. That tells me we have fundamental problems with how we treat people, and I need someone who won't be afraid to call that out and demand change. I don't have a college degree. I have a criminal record. I don't care about credentials. I care about character. And you have more character than half my executive team combined. She pulled out a folder from her bag and slid it across the table. This is the position description I drafted. Salary, benefits, scope of work. Look it over. Think about it. But understand that this isn't charity or guilt. This is me recognizing that you have exactly the perspective and skills needed to fix problems I didn't even know existed until you ended up paying the price for them. Caleb opened the folder with shaking hands. The salary listed made his breath catch. It was more than triple what he'd been making as a janitor. The benefits included healthcare, dental, vision, and, his eyes caught on this detail, childcare assistance and education support. There was a section outlining the program he'd be building: emergency assistance funds, transportation support, mental health resources, career development pathways for workers without traditional qualifications. It looked real. It looked like exactly the kind of help he'd needed 1,000 times and never received. And it looked like the kind of work that might actually matter. This is contingent on one thing, Vivian said quietly, that you're willing to work with me, not for me. I need someone who will push back, who won't be afraid to tell me when I'm wrong or when the company is failing people. Can you do that? Caleb looked up from the folder. You want me to argue with you? I want you to hold me accountable, hold all of us accountable. That's the only way this works. She paused. I know you don't have much reason to trust me, but I'm asking you to anyway. Not because I've earned it, but because together we might be able to build something that actually helps people like you. People who deserve better than what they're getting. The offer was everything Caleb could have hoped for and more. Stable income, healthcare for Sadie, a chance to do work that mattered, a way forward that didn't involve scraping by or hiding who he was. It was perfect, which was exactly why part of him wanted to run. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. Take as long as you need. Vivian stood, gathering her things. I'm releasing the statement clearing your name tomorrow. Full security footage, witness statements, expert analysis of your CPR technique. By the end of the week, everyone who saw that video will know that you saved my life and were punished for it. That happens regardless of whether you accept this position. Why tomorrow? Because I'm done letting other people control the narrative. And because you deserve to have your reputation restored whether or not you ever speak to me again. She extended her hand. Thank you for meeting with me, Caleb. Whatever you decide, I hope you know that what you did mattered. You gave me a second chance at life. I'd like to try to give you one too. After she left, Caleb sat alone with the folder open in front of him, staring at words that felt too good to be real. Director of Employee Welfare. Building programs that helped people. Making a difference. Using everything he'd learned from being at the bottom to help others who were still there. His phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Pike. How did it go? Caleb typed back. She offered me a job. A real job. Good salary, benefits, meaningful work. Mrs. Pike's response came immediately. And you said yes, right? Not yet. Still processing. What's to process? This is an answer to prayer. Maybe. Or maybe it's too good to be true. He could picture Mrs. Pike's expression at that text, the mixture of exasperation and affection she got when he was being stubborn. Her next message confirmed it. Caleb Mercer, you listen to me. You have spent years accepting less than you deserve because you thought that's all you were worth. This woman is offering you more because she knows you're worth it. Don't you dare turn it down because you're scared of being worth something. The words hit harder than they should have. Caleb closed his eyes, letting Mrs. Pike's fierce belief in him settle somewhere in his chest next to the fear and uncertainty. She was right. He knew she was right. But accepting this meant believing that he deserved it. Meant believing that he was more than his mistakes, more than his record, more than the sum of all the times he'd failed or fallen short. It meant believing he was worth saving. And if Vivian Ashford, a woman who barely knew him, could believe that, maybe it was time he believed it too. Caleb pulled out his phone and typed a message to the number Vivian had given him. I'd like to accept the position. When do I start? The response came within minutes. Monday, welcome to Ashford Industries, Caleb, for real this time. The next day, Vivian's statement broke like a thunderclap across Philadelphia media. It was comprehensive, unflinching, and left no room for interpretation. She released the full security footage showing Caleb's CPR, alongside statements from Patricia Chen and other witnesses confirming that he'd acted correctly and heroically. She included expert analysis from emergency medicine physicians explaining that his technique was textbook perfect. And she issued a formal apology, not just from herself but from Ashford Industries, acknowledging the grave injustice done to him. But she didn't stop there. She also announced Grant Hollowell's termination, detailed the investigation into corporate misconduct, and revealed the deliberate campaign to destroy Caleb's reputation. She named names, showed receipts, and made it clear that the real scandal wasn't a janitor performing CPR, but executives so caught up in class warfare that they'd punished a man for saving a life. The response was immediate and overwhelming. News outlets that had run the original scandalous story now scrambled to issue corrections and updates. Social media erupted with support for Caleb and fury at Ashford Industries' executive team. The video that had been shared as evidence of misconduct was now being reposted with accurate context, showing Caleb as he actually was, a hero who'd stepped up when no one else would. Caleb's phone exploded with messages, former coworkers apologizing for believing the worst, strangers offering support, a few media requests for interviews which he declined. He didn't need to add his voice to the story. Vivian had told it completely, and that was enough. The strangest moment came when he checked his email and found 3 job offers from other companies, all citing his quick thinking and crisis management skills as desirable qualities. He deleted them all. He had already made his choice. That weekend, before his first day at Ashford Industries, Caleb did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He took Sadie to the museum. It was one of the free admission days, and they spent 3 hours wandering through exhibits about dinosaurs and ancient civilizations and the solar system. Sadie asked a million questions, and Caleb answered what he could and made up ridiculous answers for the rest, which made her laugh so hard she snorted. Over lunch in the museum cafe, splurging on actual hot food instead of packed sandwiches, Sadie looked at him with serious eyes and said, "You seem different, Daddy." "Different how?" "Lighter. Like you're not carrying something heavy anymore." The observation was so acute it made Caleb's throat tight. "I feel lighter, baby girl. Things are getting better." "Because the nice lady gave you a job?" "Because a lot of things. But yeah, the job helps." He reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I'm going to be working at an office. Normal hours mostly, which means I'll be home for dinner and I'll be able to come to your school events. and we'll have real weekends together. Sadie's face lit up. Really? You can come to my spring concert? I'll be in the front row. She launched herself out of her chair and around the table to hug him, and Caleb held her tight, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo and feeling something in his chest finally fully unclench. They were going to be okay, not just surviving, but actually okay. On Monday morning, Caleb stood outside the Ashford Industries Tower in a suit he'd bought over the weekend. Nothing fancy, but clean and professional and his. Sadie had helped him pick out the tie, choosing one with subtle blue stripes that she declared made him look very important. Mrs. Pike had taken a dozen photos, beaming like a proud grandmother. The building looked different in daylight, less imposing and more like just another piece of the Philadelphia skyline. Caleb took a breath, squared his shoulders, and walked through the main entrance. Not the employee entrance he'd used as a janitor, but the main lobby with its polished floors and modern art installations and the kind of ambient lighting that suggested wealth and power. The security guard at the desk looked up as Caleb approached, and recognition flickered across his face. This was one of the guards who'd been there the night everything happened, one of the ones who'd escorted Caleb out of the building. For a moment, Caleb tensed, waiting for hostility or suspicion. Instead, the guard stood and extended his hand. Mr. Mercer, I owe you an apology. I was following orders that night, but I should have questioned them. What you did was heroic, and you were treated abominably. I'm sorry. Caleb shook his hand, momentarily speechless. Thank you. That means a lot. Ms. Ashford asked me to escort you up to the executive floor. Your office is ready. His office. The words felt surreal. Caleb followed the guard into the elevator, watching the numbers climb past the floors he'd once cleaned, past the conference rooms and executive suites, past the spaces where he'd been invisible, up to the 43rd floor where Vivian Ashford's office occupied prime real estate. His office turned out to be 3 doors down from hers, not huge but substantial. Windows overlooking the city, a real desk with a computer already set up, bookshelves waiting to be filled, a coffee maker in the corner, and a small conference table for meetings. It was professional, respectable, and so far removed from the basement locker room where he used to change into his uniform that Caleb had to take a moment to just stand in the doorway and absorb it. Impressive, right? Vivian's voice came from behind him. She stood in the hallway, dressed in a sharp gray suit, her professional armor back in place, but her expression was warm. I wanted you close enough that we can collaborate easily, but with enough space that you feel like this is yours. What do you think? I think it's more than I expected. Get used to it. You're going to be pushing for things people think are impossible, which means you need to look and feel like someone who can make impossible things happen. She gestured him inside and closed the door. I have your first week planned out. Meetings with HR to understand current employee support systems, or lack thereof. Conversations with facilities management to understand workforce composition. Sessions with finance to establish budget parameters for your programs. And I want you to spend time actually talking to workers, custodial staff, cafeteria employees, security, maintenance, the people who keep this building running but never get heard. That's a lot. It is, but you can handle it. Vivian pulled out a tablet and brought up a document. I also want to show you something. This is preliminary budget approval for your employee welfare initiative, $5 million for the first year. Caleb's head snapped up. $5 million? It's actually modest considering our overall operating budget, but it's enough to make a real impact. Emergency assistance fund, childcare subsidies, transportation support, mental health counseling, skills training, and education support. Everything you outlined in our conversation, plus room for programs we haven't thought of yet. She looked at him steadily. This is real, Caleb. I'm not bringing you in to manage optics or create a feel-good PR initiative. I'm giving you resources and authority to actually change how this company treats people. But that means you need to use both. Be bold. Be uncomfortable. Make people angry if that's what it takes to do right by workers who've been ignored for too long. The responsibility of it settled onto Caleb's shoulders like a weight he hadn't anticipated but somehow didn't mind carrying. This was what he'd wanted without knowing he wanted it. A chance to take everything he'd learned from struggling and turn it into something that helped others struggling now. I won't let you down, he said. I know you won't. But more importantly, don't let them down. Vivian gestured toward the window, toward the city beyond. There are hundreds of people in this building alone who are one emergency away from crisis. Thousands more in our other facilities. They need someone who understands what that feels like, someone who won't accept platitudes or half measures. That's you. After Vivian left, Caleb sat at his new desk and pulled out his phone. He took a photo of the office and sent it to Mrs. Pike and Sadie with the caption, "First day. Wish me luck." Mrs. Pike responded, "So proud of you." Sadie sent back a string of emojis, stars and hearts and smiley faces, followed by, "You're going to be the best at your job." Caleb smiled and set the phone down. Then he opened his laptop and started making notes. He thought about every time he'd needed help and couldn't get it. Every time he'd had to choose between paying rent or buying groceries. Every time he'd missed work because he couldn't afford childcare and gotten penalized for it. Every time the system had ground him down and told him it was his own fault for not being better, stronger, more capable. He thought about all of it, and he started writing. Programs for emergency financial assistance with no predatory terms. Partnerships with local childcare centers to provide subsidized care for shift workers. Transportation support for employees who didn't have reliable cars. Mental health counseling that didn't require insurance or copays. Educational programs that recognized life experience as valuable even without formal credentials. He wrote for 2 hours straight, ideas flowing faster than he could capture them. And when he finally sat back and looked at what he'd created, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Purpose. This was more than a job. This was a chance to build the safety net he'd never had, to make sure that the next person who found themselves in crisis had somewhere to turn, to prove that caring for people wasn't charity, it was good business and basic humanity wrapped together. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Patricia Chen stood in the doorway, smiling. "Welcome to the team, officially this time," she said. "Vivian asked me to check in, see if you need anything." "I'm good, just getting my bearings." "Mind if I sit for a minute?" Caleb gestured to the chair across from his desk. Patricia settled in, her expression turning thoughtful. "I wanted to tell you something," she said. "The night you saved Vivian, I froze. I had my phone out to call 911, but I froze. I watched her collapse and I couldn't move, couldn't think, and then you came in and just acted. No hesitation, no fear. You saved her life while the rest of us stood around debating what to do." "You defended me," Caleb pointed out, "when everyone else was calling security." "Eventually, but I should have done more. Should have fought harder." She leaned forward. "What I'm trying to say is that I've spent a lot of time thinking about that night, and I realized something. The system we built here rewards people who follow protocols and maintain order, even when those protocols are inadequate and that order is unjust. You broke protocol to save a life, and you were punished for it. That told me everything I needed to know about what we'd become." "So what are you going to do about it?" Patricia smiled. "Support you, loudly and publicly, because if you're going to shake things up, and I hope you do, you'll need allies in legal and HR who can help navigate the corporate bureaucracy. Consider me your first volunteer." "Why?" "Because I'm tired of being someone who freezes when action is needed, and because what you're building matters more than protecting corporate liability." She stood. "Come find me when you're ready to start rattling cages. I'm good at finding the legal precedent for doing the right thing." After she left, Caleb sat in his office and felt something he hadn't anticipated. Hope mixed with determination. This wasn't going to be easy. He'd be fighting against decades of corporate culture, against people who benefited from the status quo, against the thousand small ways that companies protected themselves instead of their people. But he wouldn't be fighting alone. His phone buzzed. A text from Vivian. "Staff meeting in 15 minutes. Conference room B. Time to meet the team." Caleb took a breath, straightened his new tie, and headed out. Whatever came next, he was ready for it. Because he'd already survived the worst thing he could imagine, losing everything for doing the right thing. And he'd come out the other side stronger. And now, finally, he had a chance to make sure others didn't have to survive it alone. The conference room was already full when Caleb arrived. A dozen faces turned toward him as he entered, some curious, some skeptical, a few openly hostile. These were the department heads and senior managers who'd survived Vivian's purge of the executive floor, the ones who'd either been absent the night of the incident or hadn't actively participated in the campaign against him. Still, Caleb could feel the weight of their assessment as he took the empty seat near the head of the table where Vivian sat reviewing notes on her tablet. She looked up, caught his eye, and gave a small nod of encouragement before standing to address the room. Thank you all for coming. I know some of you have met Caleb Mercer already, but for those who haven't, let me introduce him properly. Caleb is our new Director of Employee Welfare, a position I created to address systemic gaps in how we support our workforce. He'll be reporting directly to me and will have authority to implement programs across all departments and facilities. Vivian's tone was crisp, professional, leaving no room for interpretation. I expect full cooperation from everyone in this room. Caleb's initiatives are a priority for this company, and any resistance to his work will be viewed as insubordination. Are we clear? Murmurs of agreement circled the table, though Caleb noticed a few people exchanging glances that suggested they weren't entirely sold on this new arrangement. One man in particular, late 50s, expensive suit, the kind of groomed appearance that screamed old money, watched Caleb with undisguised disdain. "Ms. Ashford," the man said, his voice carrying the confident authority of someone used to being heard. "I appreciate the intent behind this initiative, but I have concerns about implementation. We have existing HR protocols for employee assistance. Creating a parallel system seems redundant and potentially confusing for workers who might not understand which channels to use." Vivian's expression didn't change, but something in the air shifted. "Robert, your existing HR protocols failed catastrophically when one of our employees saved my life and was subsequently terminated for it. So forgive me if I'm not interested in preserving systems that demonstrably don't work." Robert's face reddened slightly. "With all due respect, that was an isolated incident involving Grant Hollowell's personal judgment. It was a symptom of a much larger problem," Vivian interrupted. "And Caleb is here to fix that problem, starting with building programs that actually serve workers instead of just protecting the company from liability. If your department can't support that mission, I'm happy to find someone who can." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Robert's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly and said nothing more. Caleb made a mental note. This man was going to be an obstacle. Good to know early. The meeting continued with Vivian outlining the broad strokes of what she expected from the Employee Welfare Initiative. Emergency financial assistance for workers facing unexpected crises, childcare support for shift workers and single parents, transportation programs for employees without reliable access to vehicles, mental health resources that didn't require navigating insurance bureaucracy, educational opportunities for workers who wanted to develop new skills but lacked traditional credentials. With each point, Caleb watched the reactions around the table. Some people, like Patricia Chen and a younger woman from operations named Maya Torres, nodded enthusiastically and took notes. Others maintained carefully neutral expressions that could mean anything from quiet support to passive resistance. And a few, like Robert, looked increasingly unhappy with every word. When Vivian finished, she turned to Caleb. "I'll let you take it from here. Tell them what you need." Caleb stood, aware that every eye in the room was on him. This was the moment where he could play it safe, speak in corporate language about synergies and stakeholder engagement and all the other bloodless terms that meant nothing, or he could be exactly who Vivian had hired him to be. He chose the latter. "I need honesty," he said simply. "I need you to tell me where your departments are failing workers, even if that's uncomfortable to admit. I need you to send me employees who are struggling, who are one emergency away from losing their jobs or their homes or their ability to care for their families. I need you to stop seeing workers as labor resources and start seeing them as human beings whose lives extend beyond their shifts." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Robert shifted in his seat, his expression suggesting he'd just tasted something bitter. But Maya Torres leaned forward, her dark eyes intense. "What kind of struggles are you looking for?" she asked. "Like, what qualifies someone for assistance?" "Anything that threatens their stability," Caleb said. "Can't afford childcare and might miss shifts. Car broke down and they can't get to work. Medical emergency that insurance won't cover. Eviction notice because rent went up and wages didn't. Abusive home situation that they can't leave because they can't afford deposits on a new place. Whatever it is that makes it harder for them to show up and do their jobs, that's what I want to know about." "That's going to be a lot of people," Maya said quietly. I know, but that's the point. Caleb looked around the table. Most of you probably don't realize how many of your employees are barely hanging on, how many are working sick because they can't afford to take time off, how many are choosing between feeding their kids and paying utilities, how many are one flat tire away from being fired for attendance issues. I know because I was one of them. And I'm here to make sure that when people are drowning, this company throws them a rope instead of a stone. The metaphor landed with visible impact. A few people looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats or studying their notepads. Patricia Chen was smiling slightly, and Maya Torres looked like she was fighting back tears. Robert's expression had progressed from disdain to something closer to fury. "That's very poetic, Mr. Mercer," Robert said, his voice dripping with condescension. "But this is a business, not a charity. We have shareholders to answer to, profit margins to maintain. We can't solve every employee's personal problems." "I'm not asking you to solve every problem," Caleb said evenly. "I'm asking you to stop creating new ones by pretending they don't exist. When an employee loses their car and gets fired for attendance, you don't just lose that worker. You lose their institutional knowledge. You lose the cost of recruiting and training a replacement, and you lose the morale of everyone who watched a colleague get discarded instead of helped. That's bad business disguised as fiscal responsibility." Vivian's expression suggested she was enjoying this confrontation far more than she probably should be. "Robert, unless you have constructive input, I think we're done here. Everyone else, Caleb will be scheduling individual meetings with your departments over the next 2 weeks. Come prepared to have honest conversations about where you're seeing workers struggle and what resources might help. Thank you all." The dismissal was clear. People gathered their things and filed out, some stopping briefly to introduce themselves to Caleb or offer support. Maya Torres was one of the last to leave, pausing at the door. "I run operations across 3 facilities," she said. "I have a list of about 40 employees who I know are struggling. Some are about to lose housing, some can't afford transportation, some are dealing with family crises that are affecting their work. I've been trying to help through official HR channels, but it's been like screaming into a void." "Send me the list," Caleb said. "And let's set up a meeting this week. I want to understand what you've already tried and why it didn't work." After she left, only Caleb and Vivian remained. Vivian closed her laptop and looked at him with an expression that might have been pride. "You were brilliant," she said. "Direct, passionate, uncompromising, exactly what this needed." Robert hates me. Robert hates anyone who threatens the comfortable world he's built, where workers are replaceable and problems can be solved by ignoring them. Don't worry about Robert. Vivian's smile had an edge to it. His contract is up for renewal in 3 months, and I'm strongly inclined not to renew it. You're firing people for disagreeing with me? I'm declining to renew people who fundamentally oppose the direction I'm taking this company. There's a difference. She gathered her things. You have your first real test tomorrow, by the way. A worker in our Wilmington facility, single mother, 2 kids, just lost her apartment because the landlord sold the building. She's been sleeping in her car for a week and trying to hide it from her supervisor because she's afraid of being fired for instability. Caleb's stomach clenched. He knew that fear intimately. How did you find out? Maya Torres. She's been trying to help through back channels, but there's only so much she can do without official support. The woman's name is Jasmine Brooks. She's a machine operator, been with us for 6 years, excellent performance reviews. She needs first month's rent and security deposit on a new place, maybe $2,000 total. Can you help her? Yes. The answer came without hesitation. This was exactly why he was here. I'll drive to Wilmington tomorrow, talk to her directly, and get her set up with emergency housing assistance. Good. And Caleb? Vivian paused at the door. There are going to be hundreds more like Jasmine, maybe thousands. You can't save everyone. I know, but I can save some, and some is better than none. The drive to Wilmington the next morning took 90 minutes through rush hour traffic. Caleb used the time to review the file Vivian had sent him on Jasmine Brooks. 32 years old, 2 kids aged 8 and 5, divorced from an ex-husband who paid sporadic child support when he felt like it. She'd been working at the Ashford Industries manufacturing facility for 6 years, starting in entry-level assembly and working her way up to senior machine operator. Her performance reviews were consistently excellent, with supervisors praising her reliability and attention to detail. And now she was homeless, sleeping in her car with her children, terrified that admitting her situation would cost her the job she desperately needed. The Wilmington facility was smaller than the Philadelphia headquarters, a converted warehouse on the industrial edge of town. Caleb checked in at the security desk and asked for Maya Torres, who'd agreed to meet him there. She appeared within minutes, dressed practically in work boots and a company polo, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Thank you for coming," she said, shaking his hand. "Jasmine doesn't know you're here yet. I thought maybe we should approach it carefully. She's proud, and she might not take help easily." "I understand proud," Caleb said. "Let me talk to her. Where is she?" Maya led him through the facility floor past rows of machines and workers and safety gear until they reached a station where a woman worked with focused intensity on a complex-looking assembly. Jasmine Brooks was small, compact, with dark skin and eyes that carried the kind of exhaustion that came from weeks of inadequate sleep. When Maya approached and asked if she could take a break, Jasmine's expression immediately shifted to wariness. They moved to a break room, and Caleb watched Jasmine's body language shift from wary to defensive as Maya introduced him and explained why he was there. "I don't need charity," Jasmine said immediately. "I'm handling my situation." "You're sleeping in your car with 2 young kids," Maya said gently. "That's not handling it, that's surviving it, and you shouldn't have to." "I've been through worse. We'll be fine." Caleb understood the instinct to refuse help. Pride was sometimes all you had left when everything else got stripped away. But he also understood the cost of that pride, and he wasn't going to let her pay it if he could help. "Can I tell you a story?" he asked. Jasmine looked suspicious but nodded. 2 years ago, my wife died. Cancer. Left me with a 7-year-old daughter and medical bills that wiped out everything we had saved. I was working nights as a janitor, barely making rent, skipping meals so my daughter could eat. I was too proud to ask for help, too ashamed to admit I was drowning. And you know what that pride got me? Fired from a job where I saved someone's life, because I was too sick from malnutrition and stress to fight back when they came after me. He leaned forward. Pride doesn't keep the lights on, Jasmine. It doesn't put a roof over your kids' heads. And it sure as hell doesn't make you less deserving of help. Something in Jasmine's expression cracked. I've worked so hard. 6 years of showing up, doing good work, never causing problems. And one bad break? Landlord selling the building. Couldn't find another place in time because my credit shot from the divorce. And suddenly, I'm homeless. It's not fair. No, Caleb agreed. It's not fair. But it's also not your fault, and you don't have to face it alone. I'm authorized to provide emergency housing assistance, first month's rent, security deposit, moving costs. We'll work with local landlords who accept our guarantee, and we'll get you and your kids into a stable situation within the week. And what do you want in return? The question was sharp with suspicion earned from too many times being promised help that came with strings attached. Nothing. You keep doing the job you're already doing well. You keep taking care of your kids. That's it. Caleb pulled out the paperwork he'd prepared. This isn't a loan you have to pay back. It's not conditional on you staying with the company for a certain amount of time. It's just help, because you need it, and because we failed you by not having systems in place to prevent this situation in the first place. Jasmine stared at the papers like they might disappear if she looked away. Why? Why are you doing this? Because someone finally helped me when I needed it most, and I want to pass that forward. Because your kids deserve stability, and you deserve to not have to choose between keeping your job and keeping them safe. Caleb met her eyes. And because you're not a problem to be managed, Jasmine. You're a person who deserves dignity and support. The tears came then, silent and exhausted, rolling down Jasmine's face while she tried to maintain composure. Maya passed her tissues and rubbed her back while Caleb gave her space to feel whatever she needed to feel. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red but determined. Okay, she said. Okay, thank you. They spent the next hour going through logistics. Caleb had already compiled a list of landlords who'd agreed to work with his program, and together they found a 2-bedroom apartment near the kids' current school that fit Jasmine's needs. He arranged for the first month's rent and deposit to be paid directly, set her up with a grocery store gift card to restock their food supplies, and connected her with a family services counselor who could help with longer-term stability planning. By the time Caleb left Wilmington, It was late afternoon. He sat in his car in the parking lot and called Vivian. "How did it go?" she asked. "Jasmine Brooks and her kids will be in a new apartment by Friday. We're also connecting her with childcare assistants so she doesn't have to leave the 8-year-old in charge of the 5-year-old after school." Caleb paused. "She cried when I told her it wasn't alone. That broke my heart." You're going to see a lot of that. People who've been taught that help always comes with strings, that accepting assistance is weakness, that their struggles are personal failures rather than systemic problems. I know, but every person we help is one less person sleeping in their car or choosing between food and rent. That has to count for something. "It counts for everything," Vivian said quietly. "Go home, Caleb. Spend the evening with your daughter. Tomorrow we'll find the next person who needs help." When Caleb picked up Sadie from Mrs. Pike's apartment that evening, she launched into an excited story about her day, something involving a science experiment with baking soda and vinegar that had exploded more impressively than the teacher expected. Caleb listened and laughed and felt the simple joy of being present for his daughter's life in a way his schedule hadn't allowed for years. Over dinner, takeout Chinese food that they could actually afford now, Sadie asked about his day. "I helped someone today," Caleb said. "A woman with 2 kids who needed a place to live." "Like when the nice lady helped us?" Exactly like that. Sadie considered this while expertly wielding her chopsticks. "So, you're paying it forward. That's what Mrs. Pike says we should always do when someone helps us." "Mrs. Pike is a smart woman." "I know, she says you're going to change a lot of people's lives with your new job." Caleb smiled. "I'm going to try, baby girl. I'm really going to try." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of meetings, assessments, and interventions. Caleb met with every department head, reviewed employee files flagged by supervisors as concerning, and started building the infrastructure for his programs. He hired a small team, a social worker named Marcus Reed, who specialized in crisis intervention, an administrator named Jennifer Park, who could navigate bureaucracy like a scalpel through butter, and a case manager named David Kim, who had experience with housing assistance programs. Together, they helped 32 employees in the first month. A maintenance worker whose insulin costs had skyrocketed and who'd been rationing doses to make them last. A cafeteria employee whose car transmission failed and who couldn't afford the repairs needed to get to work. A security guard whose wife's medical emergency left them with bills that threatened foreclosure. A janitor, and Caleb felt the poetic justice of this one deeply, whose childcare arrangement fell through and who was about to lose custody of his kids because he couldn't afford alternatives. Each case was different, but the pattern was the same. People working hard, doing everything right, getting knocked down by circumstances beyond their control, and having nowhere to turn for help. Until now. The response from the workforce was overwhelming. Word spread quickly that there was someone at corporate who actually cared, who actually helped, who didn't treat employee problems as inconveniences to be minimized. Caleb started getting emails and calls from workers he'd never met, supervisors he'd never worked with, people who'd heard about the program and wanted to know if it could help their colleague, their friend, their family member who also worked for Ashford Industries. But not everyone was supportive. The resistance came from exactly where Caleb expected, middle management and senior staff, who saw his programs as threats to the established order. Robert from that first meeting was the most vocal, sending increasingly pointed emails about budget concerns and policy violations, and the need for appropriate boundaries between corporate assistance and employee responsibility. The confrontation finally came to a head 5 weeks into Caleb's tenure, at a budget review meeting where department heads were asked to justify their spending. Robert went first, presenting a meticulously detailed breakdown of his HR department's costs and value propositions. Then it was Caleb's turn. He pulled up his presentation, showing not just the money spent, but the outcomes achieved. 32 employees helped, 0 job losses among those employees in the month following intervention. Productivity increases across departments where workers had received assistance. Absenteeism down, morale up. Retention rates improving. "These numbers are impressive," one of the financial officers said. "But can you quantify the return on investment?" "If you're asking whether helping a single mother keep her apartment generates immediate profit, then no," Caleb said. "But if you're asking whether preventing employee turnover, reducing training costs for replacements, and building a workforce that's healthy and stable has long-term value, then absolutely. Conservative estimates suggest that each employee we help stay productive saves the company between $15,000 and $30,000 in replacement and training costs alone. Robert leaned back in his chair, his expression skeptical. Those estimates assume that these employees are actually valuable. What if we're simply prolonging the employment of workers who would have been naturally selected out through normal attrition? The room went very quiet. Caleb felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. Natural selection, he repeated slowly. You're suggesting that people who face emergencies should lose their jobs as a kind of Darwinian filtering process? I'm suggesting that business requires difficult choices. We can't afford to carry every employee through every personal crisis. Sometimes people need to solve their own problems or move on to situations better suited to their capabilities. And what about Jasmine Brooks? Caleb asked. 6 years with the company, excellent performance reviews, machine operator who trains new hires because she knows the systems better than anyone. She lost her apartment through no fault of her own. Should we have fired her and spent $20,000 recruiting and training someone new, or spent $2,000 helping her stay productive? Individual cases are always sympathetic, Robert said, but policy can't be built on emotion. This isn't emotion, this is math. Caleb pulled up another slide. Here's what it costs us when we lose experienced workers. Here's what it costs to help them through temporary crises. The second number is consistently smaller than the first. So unless you're arguing that we should deliberately choose the more expensive option out of some ideological commitment to making workers suffer, I don't understand your objection. Vivian, who'd been silent up to this point, spoke. Robert, do you have actual budget concerns, or are you simply opposed to the philosophy of this program? Robert's face reddened. I have concerns about creating a culture of dependency. If workers know there's always a safety net, they'll take more risks, make poorer choices, expect the company to bail them out from consequences. That's not what the data shows, Caleb said. Every employee we've helped has expressed gratitude and renewed commitment to the company. We're not encouraging recklessness. We're preventing good workers from being destroyed by bad luck. There's a difference. In your opinion, no. In the measurable outcomes that I've documented and presented. Caleb could feel his frustration building but tried to keep his voice level. You're entitled to your philosophy, Robert, but you're not entitled to let that philosophy hurt people when we have the resources to help them. This isn't about hurting people. Yes, it is. Caleb's voice hardened. When you argue against helping employees through crises, you're arguing for a world where Jasmine Brooks sleeps in her car with her kids, where Marcus, one of your own maintenance staff, rations insulin and risks diabetic coma, where people lose everything because they had one bad month. That's not fiscal responsibility. That's cruelty dressed up in business language. The silence that followed was absolute. Robert looked like he'd been slapped, his face cycling through anger and embarrassment. Around the table, reactions varied from shocked to satisfied, but no one spoke. Finally, Vivian stood. Vivian, I think we've heard enough. Robert, unless you have specific budget concerns backed by actual analysis rather than philosophical objections, this meeting is over. Caleb's programs are approved for expansion. Thank you all. After everyone filed out, Caleb stayed behind with Vivian. She was reviewing her notes, but he could see the slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. You enjoyed that, he said. Immensely. Robert's been a thorn in my side for years, and watching you dismantle his arguments with actual data was deeply satisfying. She looked up. But he's not going to let this go. He's going to keep pushing back, keep trying to undermine your work. Are you ready for that? I've dealt with worse than corporate bureaucrats who don't like me. I know, but this is different than what you're used to. Robert's not going to confront you directly. He's going to work behind the scenes, try to poison other people against your programs, look for any mistake or failure he can weaponize. You need to be prepared for that kind of fight. Caleb thought about the weeks after he'd saved Vivian's life, when the entire system had turned against him. Thought about waking up to find his reputation destroyed and his livelihood gone. Thought about how it felt to be systematically erased by people who'd never even met him. Let him try, Caleb said quietly. I've already been through the worst thing he could possibly do to me. And I'm still here. Robert's retaliation came exactly 3 weeks later, and it was more calculated than Caleb had anticipated. He arrived at his office one Monday morning to find an email waiting from the compliance department, flagged as urgent and copied to half the executive floor, including Vivian. The subject line read, "Concerns regarding Employee Welfare Initiative protocol violations." Caleb's stomach tightened as he read through the carefully worded accusations. Robert had compiled a list of alleged irregularities in how Caleb's team had processed assistance requests: missing documentation for emergency fund disbursements, failure to follow proper approval chains for housing assistance, unauthorized access to employee personnel files, and what Robert termed inappropriate fraternization with workers receiving aid. Each accusation was paired with specific case numbers and dates, giving the whole document an air of meticulous investigative work. It was also, Caleb realized as he cross-referenced the claims against his actual records, almost entirely fabricated or deliberately misrepresented. The missing documentation was a paperwork that had been filed in a different system than Robert expected because Caleb had set up new processes that actually worked. The failure to follow approval chains referred to emergency situations where waiting for multiple sign-offs would have meant a worker losing their apartment or going without medication. The unauthorized access was access that Vivian had explicitly granted Caleb as part of his role. And the inappropriate fraternization was Caleb doing his job, meeting with employees, understanding their situations, treating them like human beings instead of case numbers. But the damage wasn't in the accuracy of the accusations. It was in the doubt they created, the questions they raised, the narrative they built that Caleb was running a rogue operation without proper oversight. His phone rang. Vivian. "Have you seen Robert's email?" she asked without preamble. "Reading it now. It's garbage, but it's carefully constructed garbage. He's trying to create a paper trail that suggests your program is mismanaged and potentially fraudulent. I need you to put together a comprehensive response with documentation for every claim he's made. Can you do that?" "Yes, but Vivian, this is going to keep happening. Every time we help someone, every time we deviate from his idea of proper protocol, he's going to find a way to weaponize it." "I know, which is why we're going to shut this down permanently." Her voice had taken on an edge that Caleb had learned meant she was done playing nice. "Respond to the email professionally with full documentation. I'll handle Robert." Caleb spent the next 6 hours assembling his response, pulling together approval emails, financial records, case files, and policy documents that proved every single one of his decisions had been appropriate and authorized. Jennifer Park helped him organize the material into a presentation that was both comprehensive and damning, not of Caleb's program, but of Robert's attempt to undermine it. By the time he sent the response at 4 in the afternoon, copying the same distribution list Robert had used, Caleb felt a grim satisfaction. The documentation didn't just defend his program, it exposed Robert's accusations as either incompetent misunderstanding or deliberate misrepresentation. And in corporate settings, being proven publicly wrong was often worse than being quietly malicious. The response from the executive floor was swift. Patricia Chen sent a terse email confirming that legal had reviewed Caleb's documentation and found no compliance issues. The CFO, a new hire named Sarah Martinez, who'd replaced Grant Hollowell, sent a note praising the fiscal responsibility of the program's cost-benefit analysis. Even a few department heads who'd been neutral or skeptical sent private messages expressing support. Robert sent nothing. But the next morning, Caleb arrived at work to find something worse than an email waiting. A small group of workers had gathered outside the main entrance, holding signs. The messages varied, but the theme was consistent. Ashford Industries doesn't care about workers. We are not disposable. Respect your employees. Caleb's first instinct was confusion until he saw Maya Torres hurrying toward him from the building entrance, her expression tight with worry. "It's not about you," she said quickly. "Well, it is, but not the way you think. Someone leaked a version of Robert's accusations to workers' rights groups, framed it as evidence that your program is being shut down. The rumor is that corporate is dismantling employee assistance because it's too expensive. That's not true. We just proved all of Robert's claims were baseless. I know that, you know that, but the workers who've been helped by your program, they're terrified that the one good thing this company has done for them is about to disappear. So they're protesting." Caleb stared at the small group of protesters, recognizing a few faces. One woman held a sign that read, "Caleb Mercer saved my family." Another held one saying, "Don't take away our safety net." His chest tightened with a complicated mix of emotions: pride that his work had mattered enough for people to fight for it, fury at Robert for creating this situation, and fear that this protest would give ammunition to everyone who'd argued his program was too disruptive. "I need to talk to them," Caleb said. "Are you sure? If corporate sees you engaging with protesters—" "I don't care what corporate thinks. These people are scared because someone lied to them. They deserve the truth." Caleb walked toward the group before Maya could protest further. The protesters noticed him approaching and fell silent, their expressions wary and hopeful in equal measure. Caleb recognized the woman with the "Saved My Family" sign, Teresa Martinez, a warehouse worker whose car had been repossessed, and who'd been about to lose her job before Caleb's program helped her get a reliable used vehicle through their transportation assistance. "Teresa," Caleb said quietly, "what's going on?" "We heard they're shutting you down," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "That corporate is ending the employee welfare initiative because it costs too much. Is that true?" "No, it's absolutely not true. Someone spread false information to make it look like the program was mismanaged. We proved those accusations were baseless yesterday. The program isn't going anywhere." Relief flooded several faces, but Teresa's expression remained troubled. "How do we know you're not just saying that? How do we know that next week or next month they won't find some other excuse to get rid of you?" It was a fair question, and Caleb didn't have a perfect answer because he knew how corporate systems worked. Vivian supported him now, but Vivian was one person against decades of institutional inertia and resistance. If enough pressure built up, if enough people like Robert kept pushing back, eventually something would give. "I can't give you a guarantee," Caleb said honestly. "What I can tell you is that I'm not going anywhere willingly, and neither is this program. We've helped over 80 employees in 2 months. We've saved this company hundreds of thousands of dollars in turnover costs. We've proven that investing in workers is good business and basic decency. Anyone who wants to shut that down is going to have to go through me, through my team, and through everyone who's seen what's possible when a company actually cares about its people." "But what if they fire you like they fired you before?" another protester asked. "What if you save someone again and they punish you again?" The question hung in the air, and Caleb felt the weight of everyone watching him. This was the fundamental question, wasn't it? What happened when doing the right thing meant risking everything you'd built? "Then I guess I'll have to deal with that when it happens," Caleb said. "But I'm not going to stop helping people because I'm afraid of consequences. I didn't stop giving CPR when security tried to pull me away, and I'm not stopping this work now just because someone wants to make it difficult." Movement behind him made Caleb turn. Vivian had emerged from the building and was walking toward the group with Patricia Chen and Sarah Martinez flanking her. The protesters tensed, clearly expecting confrontation or demands that they disperse. Instead, Vivian walked directly to Teresa Martinez and extended her hand. "Miss Martinez, I'm Vivian Ashford. I understand you're concerned about the future of our employee welfare initiative." Teresa shook her hand hesitantly. "We just want to keep the program. It's the only thing that's helped us when we needed it." "I understand completely, and I want to make something very clear, not just to you, but to everyone here and everyone who works for this company." Vivian raised her voice slightly, addressing the full group. "The Employee Welfare Initiative is not being shut down. It's not being reduced. If anything, we're expanding it. The accusations made against Mr. Mercer and his team were investigated and found to be completely baseless. The person who made those accusations is no longer with this company as of this morning." Murmurs rippled through the group. Caleb's head snapped toward Vivian. She'd fired Robert. Actually fired him. "Furthermore," Vivian continued, "I'm announcing today that we're establishing a worker advisory council. 6 employees from different departments and facilities, elected by their peers, who will meet monthly with senior leadership to discuss working conditions, assistance needs, and program development. Because Mr. Mercer is right, this company should invest in its people, and the best way to know what people need is to actually listen to them." The change in the protesters was immediate and visible. Tension drained from shoulders, expressions shifted from defensive to cautiously optimistic, and someone in the back actually started clapping. Others joined in, and suddenly Caleb was watching a protest transform into something closer to a celebration. Teresa Martinez wiped her eyes and said to Vivian, "Thank you. You don't know what this means to people like us." "I'm learning," Vivian said quietly. Thanks to Mr. Mercer, I'm learning. After the protesters dispersed, several stopping to shake Caleb's hand or thank him directly, Vivian pulled him aside. You fired Robert, Caleb said. I terminated his contract for cause. Attempting to sabotage a corporate initiative through falsified compliance claims, leaking confidential information to create disruption, and actively working against company directives. Take your pick. Her expression was cold satisfaction. He'll receive severance as contractually required, but he's barred from future employment with any Ashford Industries subsidiary or partner organization. He wanted to play hardball. He lost. And the Worker Advisory Council? Something I should have implemented years ago. You were right that first day. The best way to understand what workers need is to ask them directly. The council will have actual authority to recommend policy changes and budget allocations for your programs. No more guessing what people need. They'll tell us. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he hadn't fully realized he'd been carrying. This wasn't just about protecting his program anymore. This was about fundamentally changing how Ashford Industries operated, making worker welfare not a side initiative but a central corporate value. When do we start? He asked. Elections next week. First meeting in 3 weeks. I want you to facilitate the initial sessions until the council finds its rhythm. Vivian paused. This is going to make some people uncomfortable, Caleb. Giving workers direct input into policy. Some managers are going to resist. Let them resist. We've already proven that helping workers helps the bottom line. Anyone who can't see that doesn't belong in leadership. Vivian smiled. See, that's exactly the attitude I hired you for. Come on, we have a press conference in an hour. Press conference? You think I'm announcing a Worker Advisory Council and the expansion of the Employee Welfare Initiative without making sure everyone knows about it? This is going on record, Caleb. No more room for people like Robert to operate in the shadows. The press conference took place in the same boardroom where Caleb had saved Vivian's life 3 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on him as he stood beside her in front of cameras and reporters, watching her deliver a statement that positioned Ashford Industries as a leader in worker support and corporate responsibility. She outlined the Employee Welfare Initiative's accomplishments, announced the Worker Advisory Council, and fielded questions with the same confidence she brought to quarterly earnings calls. When a reporter asked Caleb directly how it felt to go from being fired for saving the CEO's life to directing a major corporate initiative, he took a breath and gave the most honest answer he could. It feels like justice, not just for me, but for everyone who's ever been punished for doing the right thing or overlooked because they didn't fit someone's idea of who deserved help. This program exists because I know what it's like to need assistance and have nowhere to turn. And as long as I'm in this position, I'm going to make sure that other people don't have to face those situations alone. The soundbite made the evening news on 3 different channels. By the next morning, Caleb's phone was flooded with messages from people across the country, workers sharing their own stories of struggle, HR professionals asking how to implement similar programs, even a few other companies inquiring about consulting to help develop their own employee welfare initiatives. But the message that mattered most came from Sadie's school. Her teacher sent an email explaining that Sadie had given a presentation to her class about My Dad the Hero and talked about how he saved someone's life and then built programs to help families like theirs. The email included a photo of Sadie standing in front of her poster board, beaming with pride, her smile so bright it made Caleb's eyes sting with tears. He printed the photo and put it on his desk, right where he could see it every day. A reminder of why this work mattered, a reminder that he wasn't just building programs, he was building a better world for his daughter and kids like her. The Worker Advisory Council's first meeting 3 weeks later brought together 6 employees from different levels and facilities. Teresa Martinez from the warehouse, Marcus Reed, the maintenance worker whose insulin costs Caleb had helped cover, who'd been elected to represent facilities staff. A young woman named Amy Chen from IT who'd been homeless before the Housing Assistance Program helped her stabilize. A senior cafeteria manager named Robert Johnson who'd worked for Ashford Industries for 23 years. A machine operator from the Wilmington facility named James Torres. And Jasmine Brooks, who'd been sleeping in her car with her kids and was now not just housed, but thriving. Caleb facilitated the meeting, but he made it clear from the start that this was their space, their voice, their chance to shape the company's approach to worker welfare. "Tell me what's working," he said. "Tell me what's not. Tell me what we're missing." No filters, no corporate speak, just honest assessment. What followed was 3 hours of the most productive conversation Caleb had experienced in his entire time at Ashford Industries. The council members didn't hold back. They praised the Emergency Assistance Fund and housing support, but pointed out that the mental health resources were too limited and difficult to access. They loved the transportation program, but noted that it didn't help workers whose shifts ended after public transit stopped running. They appreciated the childcare assistance, but wanted extended options for parents working overnight shifts. Every critique came with suggestions. Every problem came with ideas for solutions. These weren't people complaining. They were people invested in making things better because they understood the stakes personally and intimately. Sarah Martinez, the new CFO, attended the meeting as an observer and took copious notes. Afterward, she pulled Caleb aside with an expression of genuine amazement. "I've been in corporate finance for 20 years, she said. "I've sat through thousands of meetings where executives theorize about worker needs and efficiency optimization. This was the first time I've heard actual workers articulate exactly what would make them more productive and what barriers prevent them from doing their jobs well. Why isn't this standard practice everywhere?" "Because most companies would rather guess about worker needs than actually listen to workers," Caleb said. "It's easier to maintain the illusion that everything's fine than to hear how many people are struggling." "Well, I'm a convert. I'm allocating additional budget for every recommendation that came out of this meeting. If we can triple productivity and reduce turnover by actually addressing worker needs, that's the easiest investment decision I've ever made." Over the next 3 months, the Worker Advisory Council became the driving force behind program expansion and policy reform. They identified issues Caleb's team had missed: the lack of support for workers caring for elderly parents, the absence of resources for employees dealing with domestic violence, the gap in assistance for workers trying to pursue education while working full-time. Each issue got addressed with programs designed in partnership with the people who would actually use them. The results were extraordinary. Employee turnover dropped by 40% across all facilities. Productivity increased measurably in departments where workers received targeted support. Absenteeism decreased. Workplace injuries went down because workers weren't showing up sick or exhausted or distracted by crises they couldn't manage. The company saved an estimated $3 million in the first 6 months just from reduced turnover and training costs, more than offsetting the expanded budget for employee assistance. But the real measure of success came in smaller, quieter moments. Teresa Martinez buying her first home after years of housing instability, made possible by credit counseling and financial planning support from Caleb's team. Marcus Reed's daughter graduating high school with a college scholarship, which her father could actually celebrate because he wasn't rationing insulin anymore. Jasmine Brooks being promoted to training supervisor, her expertise finally recognized and rewarded because she was stable enough to take on additional responsibilities. And Amy Chen, the young IT worker who'd been homeless, who stood up at a company-wide meeting 6 months after the first Worker Advisory Council session and said something that made even the most skeptical managers reconsider their positions. "I used to think this company saw me as disposable," she said, her voice steady and clear. "I thought that if I failed, if I struggled, if I needed help, I'd just be replaced by someone who didn't need as much support. But the Employee Welfare Initiative showed me that Ashford Industries actually values the people who work here, not as labor units or productivity metrics, but as human beings whose lives matter. That changed everything for me. I'm not just working for a paycheck anymore. I'm invested in this company's success because I know this company is invested in mine." The applause that followed was genuine and prolonged. Caleb, watching from the side of the auditorium, felt Vivian's hand briefly touch his shoulder. "You did this," she said quietly. "You built this." "We built this," Caleb corrected. "You gave me the resources and authority. The council gave me the direction. My team did the implementation. This was never about one person. Maybe, but it started with one person being brave enough to act when everyone else froze. In the boardroom that night, and in every difficult conversation since." Vivian smiled. "I'm glad you didn't let me die, Caleb, but I'm even more glad you didn't let this company stay the way it was." 9 months after Caleb had knelt on a boardroom floor performing CPR, he received an invitation to speak at the National Conference on Corporate Responsibility in Washington, D.C. The conference organizers wanted him to present on the Employee Welfare Initiative as a case study in stakeholder capitalism and worker-centered business practices. The keynote speech slot, they said, would give him a platform to reach HR leaders and executives from companies across the country. Caleb almost declined. Public speaking wasn't his strength, and the idea of standing in front of hundreds of corporate leaders felt intimidating in ways that kneeling on a floor doing chest compressions never had. But when he mentioned the invitation to the Worker Advisory Council, Jasmine Brooks fixed him with a look that reminded him of Mrs. Pike at her most formidable. "You have to go," she said. "You have to tell them how this works. Because there are workers in every company in this country who need what we have here, and most of them will never get it unless someone teaches their employers how to actually care about people." So Caleb went to Washington with Vivian, Sarah Martinez, and 2 members of the Worker Advisory Council who'd agreed to be part of a panel discussion. He spent the flight reviewing his speech, crossing out corporate jargon and replacing it with plain language that actually meant something. When Vivian read the draft, she laughed and said it was either going to revolutionize how people thought about worker welfare or get him laughed out of the conference. Possibly both. The conference hall was massive, filled with several hundred executives and HR professionals in expensive suits and carefully maintained professional demeanors. Caleb walked onto the stage in his best suit, still modest compared to most of the audience, but clean and professional, and looked out at a sea of faces that represented exactly the kind of corporate power structure that had once fired him for saving a life. He gripped the podium, took a breath, and began. 9 months ago, I was a night shift janitor making $12 an hour and struggling to keep my 7-year-old daughter fed. I had a criminal record, a dead wife, and a resume that made most employers stop reading after the first line. I was exactly the kind of person that corporate systems are designed to overlook, exploit, and discard when convenient. The room had gone very quiet. Caleb could see some people shifting uncomfortably, others leaning forward with interest. Then one night, in a boardroom I had no business entering, I saved the life of a billionaire CEO while her executive team stood around debating whether to call for help. I performed textbook CPR, brought her back from cardiac arrest, and was immediately fired for inappropriate physical contact with a senior executive. Within days, I was unemployed, publicly humiliated, and facing the very real possibility of homelessness. He paused, letting that sink in. I'm telling you this not for sympathy, but because I need you to understand something fundamental. The systems we've built in corporate America are designed to punish people for being human, for having emergencies, for needing help, for not fitting into neat categories of productivity and efficiency. We've created workplaces where saving someone's life can get you fired, where asking for assistance is seen as weakness, where one bad month can destroy a good employee's entire career. Caleb looked out at the audience, seeing the range of reactions from defensive to thoughtful to quietly agreeing. But here's what I learned after I was fired, after the woman I saved discovered what had been done in her name, after she offered me a chance to build something better. I learned that it doesn't have to be this way. That investing in worker welfare isn't charity or excessive kindness, it's good business backed by measurable outcomes. And I learned that the biggest barrier to creating supportive workplaces isn't cost or feasibility. It's the belief that workers don't deserve support unless they've somehow earned it through perfect behavior and endless resilience. He clicked to the next slide, showing the financial data from Ashford Industries. In 9 months, our Employee Welfare Initiative has helped 243 employees through crises that would have previously resulted in job loss. We've spent approximately $2 million on direct assistance, and we've saved the company an estimated $4 million in reduced turnover, lower training costs, decreased absenteeism, and increased productivity. The return on investment is 200%, and that's only counting the easily quantifiable benefits. Another slide. But the real impact isn't in the spreadsheets. It's in the single mother who didn't lose her kids because we helped her get stable housing. It's in the diabetic maintenance worker who isn't rationing insulin anymore. It's in the warehouse employee who kept her job after her car broke down because we provided transportation assistance. It's in the 243 lives that didn't fall apart because someone finally asked what they needed and then actually provided it. Caleb moved away from the podium, speaking more directly to the audience. You're all here because you care about corporate responsibility and stakeholder capitalism. But I'm going to challenge you on what that actually means. It doesn't mean better PR or more impressive ESG scores. It means building systems that treat workers like human beings whose lives matter beyond their productivity. It means creating safety nets instead of trapdoors. It means understanding that the receptionist struggling with childcare costs and the executive struggling with work-life balance both deserve support, even if their struggles look different. He could see people taking notes now, phones out recording, attention fully engaged. The Ashford Industries Employee Welfare Initiative works because it's built on 3 principles. First, trust workers to tell you what they need instead of assuming you know better. Second, provide help without strings attached or judgment about how people ended up needing assistance. Third, measure success not just in dollars saved, but in lives stabilized and people empowered. Final slide. I'm going to leave you with one question. What would happen in your companies if you stopped treating worker struggles as personal failures and started treating them as opportunities to build loyalty, increase retention, and create workforces that are healthy, stable, and genuinely invested in your success? Because I can tell you from experience, both as someone who needed help and as someone who now provides it, that the answer is transformational. For workers, for companies, and for the entire broken system we've all been operating within for too long. He stepped back from the podium. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions. The applause started slowly, then built to something sustained and genuine. Hands shot up across the audience. For the next 45 minutes, Caleb fielded questions ranging from technical implementation details to philosophical debates about corporate responsibility. He answered them all honestly, never sugarcoating the challenges but always emphasizing the possibilities. When a skeptical CFO asked how to justify the cost to shareholders focused on short-term returns, Caleb smiled and said, "Tell them that treating workers well is risk management. Every employee you help through a crisis is one less lawsuit, one less PR disaster, one less social media storm about corporate callousness. And if they still don't care, remind them that high turnover is expensive and that investing $2,000 in worker assistance is cheaper than spending $20,000 replacing them." The panel discussion afterward featured Jasmine Brooks and Teresa Martinez sharing their stories. Jasmine talked about sleeping in her car with her kids and how the housing assistance didn't just save her job, it gave her the stability to finally pursue the management training she'd been putting off for years. Teresa described how transportation assistance let her keep working after her car was repossessed, and how that assistance had evolved into her buying a reliable used vehicle that she now owned outright. The impact was visible. Corporate leaders who'd arrived skeptical were asking detailed questions about implementation. HR professionals were taking notes on program structures and budget allocation. Several people approached Caleb during the break to ask about consulting or site visits to see the programs in action. But the conversation that mattered most came from a young woman who waited until almost everyone else had left. "Mr. Mercer," she said quietly, "I'm an HR manager at a tech company in California. We have an employee right now who's going through something similar to what you described. Domestic violence situation, needs help getting away but can't afford first month's rent on a new place. I've been trying to help her through official channels, but everything has so many requirements and approval processes that by the time we could get her assistance, it might be too late." She handed him her card. "Could you talk me through how your emergency assistance fund works? How you cut through the bureaucracy fast enough to actually help people in crisis?" Caleb took the card and smiled. "I can do better than that. I can send you our entire program documentation, protocols, forms, budget structures, everything. Use whatever helps. Modify whatever doesn't. The goal isn't to protect our intellectual property. It's to make sure your employee gets help before it's too late." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means." "I think I do," Caleb said gently. "Because 4 months ago, that employee was me. Make sure she knows she's not alone." The flight back to Philadelphia felt different than the flight out. Caleb sat with his laptop open, responding to the flood of emails from conference attendees who wanted more information, more resources, more guidance on building similar programs. Vivian worked beside him, reviewing budget proposals for the Employee Welfare Initiative's expansion into Ashford Industries' West Coast facilities. "You know what we've built is going to outlast both of us," Vivian said without looking up from her tablet. "Even if you left tomorrow, even if I step down next year, the structures we've created are too embedded now. The Worker Advisory Council has real power. The programs have proven results. We've changed the culture permanently." "Good," Caleb said. "That was always the goal. Make it too essential to dismantle, too effective to ignore, too woven into the company's identity to strip out without destroying something fundamental." "Mission accomplished, then." Vivian closed her tablet and looked at him. "What's next for you?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, you've proven the concept. You've built the systems. You've trained a team. You could leverage this into almost anything. Consulting, teaching, policy work. What do you actually want?" Caleb thought about the question seriously. 6 months ago, he would have said he just wanted stability. A job that paid bills, insurance for Sadie, enough breathing room to not constantly worry about the next crisis. But he had all of that now, and the question of what came next felt both more complex and more clear than he'd expected. "I want to keep doing this," he said finally, "not because I need to prove anything anymore, but because it matters. Every person we help is someone who doesn't have to go through what I went through. Every life we stabilize is a kid who doesn't have to watch their parent fall apart. Every system we fix is one less barrier between people and the support they deserve." He looked out the plane window at the clouds below. "I spent so long being told I wasn't enough, not educated enough, not credentialed enough, not respectable enough to deserve consideration. And then you gave me a chance to prove that the only credential that really matters is giving a damn about people and being willing to do the hard work of actually helping them. I'm not ready to walk away from that." "Then don't," Vivian said simply. "Stay as long as you want. Build as big as you can dream. You've earned the right to define what success looks like." 3 weeks after the conference, Caleb got a call from Mrs. Pike in the middle of a budget meeting. She never called during work hours unless something was wrong, so he excused himself and answered immediately. "Caleb, everything's fine," she said quickly, "but Sadie's school called. There's a situation." His heart rate spiked. "What kind of situation?" "Her friend Emma, the one she's always talking about, came to school this morning with bruises. Teacher noticed, contacted the counselor, and Emma finally admitted her mother's boyfriend has been hitting both of them. They're involving child services, but apparently Emma told the counselor that Sadie said her dad helps families who need it. The counselor wanted to know if that was true." Caleb closed his eyes, his mind already racing through protocols and resources. "Tell them I'm on my way. And Mrs. Pike? Call Jennifer Park at my office. Tell her we need emergency housing assistance for a domestic violence situation. 2 people. And I need her to start paperwork immediately." "Already calling her. Go help that little girl, Caleb." 40 minutes later, Caleb sat in the school counselor's office across from a frightened woman in her early 30s with a fading bruise on her cheekbone and a 9-year-old daughter who wouldn't make eye contact. The counselor had made the introductions and explained the situation, then stepped out to give them privacy. "Ms. Chen," Caleb said gently, "my name is Caleb Mercer. I run an employee welfare program at Ashford Industries, and while that's specifically for our workers, I have connections with organizations that help families in situations like yours. With your permission, I'd like to make some calls." Emma's mother, Lisa Chen, looked at him with the particular wariness of someone who'd been promised help before and received judgment instead. "I don't work for your company. Why would you help us?" "Because my daughter is Emma's friend, and because no child should have to go to school with bruises from someone who's supposed to protect them." Caleb leaned forward slightly. "I can't fix everything, Ms. Chen, but I can connect you with a domestic violence shelter that has immediate availability. I can help you get a protection order filed today. I can make sure you have emergency funds for food and basic necessities while you figure out next steps. And I can do all of that without judgment or conditions, because the only thing that matters right now is keeping you and Emma safe." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "I don't have anywhere to go. My family disowned me when I didn't leave him the first time. I don't have savings. I don't have anyone." "You have people now," Caleb said quietly. "You have me. You have the resources I can access, and you have a community that's going to make sure you don't face this alone. But I need you to decide you're ready to leave. I can't make that choice for you." Lisa looked at her daughter, who was crying silently, and something in her expression hardened with determination. "I'm ready. What do I need to do?" 3 hours later, Lisa and Emma were checked into a domestic violence shelter with immediate intake, had protection orders filed, and had emergency assistance funds to cover their immediate needs. Caleb had called in favors with organizations he'd built relationships with through his work, and everyone had moved with the kind of urgent coordination that crises demanded. When Caleb finally made it home that evening, exhausted and emotionally drained, he found Sadie waiting up with Mrs. Pike. His daughter ran to him and wrapped her arms around his waist. "Did you help Emma?" she asked. "I helped Emma and her mom get somewhere safe," Caleb said. "They're going to be okay." "Good. Emma's my best friend. I told her you were a hero who saved people. I told her you'd know what to do." Caleb pulled Sadie close, feeling the weight and wonder of being seen through his daughter's eyes. To her, helping people wasn't complicated corporate policy or budget negotiations. It was simply what you did when someone needed it. It was the most natural thing in the world. "You're a good friend, baby girl," he said. "Emma's lucky to have you." That night, after Sadie was asleep, Caleb sat at his kitchen table with a cup of tea and thought about the path that had led him here. From a janitor barely scraping by to a director of a program that had helped hundreds of people. From someone fired for doing the right thing to someone invited to teach others how to do it. From a man who'd been told he wasn't enough to a man who'd proven that being enough had nothing to do with credentials and everything to do with character. His phone buzzed, a text from Vivian. "Saw your call logs. You helped someone today who doesn't even work for us. That's above and beyond, Caleb." He typed back, "A 9-year-old asked for help. Didn't feel like I had a choice." Her response came quickly. "That's exactly why you're good at this. You never feel like you have a choice to walk away. It's instinct for you, like CPR in that boardroom. You just act." Caleb smiled and set his phone down. She was right, in a way. He'd spent so long being the person who needed help that when he finally had the power to provide it, refusing felt impossible. Every person he helped was a version of himself in some timeline where luck ran differently. Every life he stabilized was a debt paid forward to the universe that had somehow, improbably, given him this chance. 2 months later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Caleb stood in front of a crowd of 500 people gathered in a Philadelphia community center. The occasion was the launch of the Ashford Foundation for Worker Welfare, a nonprofit organization funded by Ashford Industries but operating independently to provide assistance to workers across multiple companies and industries. Vivian had proposed the idea. The board had approved it enthusiastically once they'd seen the Employee Welfare Initiative's results. And Caleb had been asked to serve as founding director. The crowd included workers from a dozen different companies, HR professionals interested in implementing similar programs, community organizers who'd been fighting for worker rights for decades, and reporters covering what some were calling a revolutionary approach to corporate responsibility. But the people who mattered most to Caleb were in the front row. Mrs. Pike, beaming with pride. Sadie, holding a sign she'd made herself that said, "My dad helps everyone." And next to them, Jasmine Brooks, Teresa Martinez, Marcus Reed, and a dozen other workers whose lives had been changed by being seen, being heard, and being helped when they needed it most. Caleb stepped up to the microphone and looked out at faces representing possibility and hope, and the radical idea that caring for people wasn't radical at all. It was just what you did if you wanted to build a world worth living in. 10 months ago, he began, I did something that should have been unremarkable. I performed CPR on someone who was dying, and because of who I was and who she was, that simple act of helping someone in crisis became a scandal that cost me everything I'd built. I was fired, publicly humiliated, and left to wonder if doing the right thing would always come with punishment. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But something unexpected happened in the aftermath. The woman I saved decided that the real scandal wasn't that I'd helped her, but that the systems we'd built punished people for being human, for having emergencies, for needing support. So she gave me the resources and authority to build something better. And together with workers who knew exactly what better looked like, because they'd survived without it, we created programs that proved a simple truth. Investing in people is good business and basic decency wrapped into one. Caleb gestured to the people in the front row. The Ashford Foundation for Worker Welfare exists because these people and hundreds like them showed us what was possible. They told us what they needed. They helped us design programs that actually worked. They proved that when you give people support without judgment and help without strings attached, they don't become dependent. They become empowered. He looked directly at Sadie, who was watching him with shining eyes. My daughter once told me that the world was wrong for punishing people who did the right thing. She was 7 years old and she understood something that took me decades to learn, that helping people shouldn't be controversial or complicated. It should be as natural as breathing, as instinctive as dropping to your knees when someone's heart stops and doing whatever it takes to bring them back. The crowd was completely silent, hanging on every word. So here's my challenge to everyone here today. Whether you're a worker who's struggling, an executive who has resources, an HR professional who sets policy, or just someone who believes people deserve dignity, find one way to help. One person you can support. One system you can change. One barrier you can remove between someone and the stability they need to thrive. Caleb's voice strengthened with conviction. Because the truth is, we're all one emergency away from crisis. One medical diagnosis, one car accident, one job loss, one bad month where everything that can go wrong does go wrong. The only difference between someone who survives that crisis and someone who doesn't is whether they have support when they need it most. This foundation exists to be that support, to prove that we can build a world where doing the right thing is rewarded instead of punished, where asking for help is met with resources instead of judgment, where every person matters, not because of what they produce, but because they're human beings deserving of dignity and care. He stepped back from the microphone. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that change is possible, and thank you for being willing to do the hard work of making that change real. The applause was thunderous, sustained, genuine. People stood, phones out recording, tears on faces, and Caleb felt something settle in his chest that he'd been missing for most of his adult life. Not just stability or success, but purpose. The bone-deep certainty that what he was doing mattered, that the struggles he'd survived had meaning beyond just endurance, that every hard lesson could be transformed into help for someone else walking a similar path. After the speeches and press interviews and handshaking and photos, after the crowd had dispersed and the community center was quiet again, Caleb found himself alone for a moment with Vivian. They stood by the windows overlooking the street, watching people stream out to continue their days. You know what the best part of all this is? Vivian asked. What's that? 3 months ago, I had nightmares about dying in that boardroom, about my heart stopping and everyone just standing around watching because they were too scared or too uncertain to act. But now when I think about that night, all I remember is you, dropping to your knees without hesitation, refusing to stop even when security tried to pull you away, fighting for my life when everyone else had already written me off. She turned to face him. You gave me a second chance, Caleb. And watching what you've built with the second chance I gave you, it's the best return on investment I've ever made. Caleb smiled. I'm pretty sure the return on investment is actually $4 million and counting. I'm not talking about money. Vivian's expression was soft, genuine. I'm talking about the realization that the person society told me wasn't worth noticing turned out to be the person who saved my life, and then used that second chance to save hundreds of others. That's worth more than any balance sheet could measure. Before Caleb could respond, Sadie came running up with Mrs. Pike trailing behind at a more sedate pace. Daddy, can we get ice cream to celebrate? Sadie asked. Mrs. Pike says yes if you say yes. Mrs. Pike is a terrible influence on you, Caleb said, scooping his daughter up. Of course we can get ice cream. Sadie cheered and wiggled to be put down so she could run ahead. Mrs. Pike caught up, slightly out of breath, and linked her arm through Caleb's. You did good today, she said quietly. Elena would be proud. The mention of his late wife usually brought pain, but today it brought something softer. Gratitude that she'd existed, that they'd had their time together, however brief, that she'd given him Sadie and all the reasons he'd had to keep fighting when everything fell apart. I hope so, Caleb said. I really hope so. They walked out into the Philadelphia sunshine, heading toward the ice cream shop 3 blocks away where Sadie was already planning her order. And as Caleb walked with his daughter's hand in his, and Mrs. Pike chattering about the speech, and Vivian's phone buzzing with messages from companies wanting to learn about the foundation, he felt something he'd thought was lost forever in the aftermath of Elena's death and his own repeated failures. He felt whole. Not because everything was perfect, there would always be challenges, always be people who resisted change, always be more work to do than hours to do it, but because he'd found the thing that made sense of all the struggling and surviving. He'd taken every hard lesson, every moment of needing help and having nowhere to turn, every time the system had ground him down and told him he wasn't enough, and he'd transformed it all into something that mattered. He'd become the person he'd needed when he was drowning. And now, finally, he could help others reach the shore. 6 months later, Caleb stood in the wings of a much larger stage, waiting to deliver the keynote address at the International Labor Rights Conference. The foundation had grown beyond anyone's initial projections, serving workers across 15 states and partnering with 30 companies to implement welfare programs. The model was being studied in business schools, praised in policy circles, and most importantly, actually helping people build stable lives. But before he walked onto that stage, his phone buzzed with a text that made everything else fade into background noise. It was from a number he didn't recognize, but the message was clear. "Mr. Mercer, you don't know me, but I'm the HR director at the company where I heard you speak 6 months ago. The employee I asked you about, the one in the domestic violence situation, she got out. She's safe. Her kids are safe. And it's because you shared your protocols without hesitation or expectation of credit. She asked me to tell you thank you. You saved her life without ever meeting her. I thought you should know." Caleb read the message 3 times, his throat tight with emotion. This was why it mattered. Not the keynote speeches or the foundation growth or the policy changes. This, one woman and her children safe because information shared freely had reached the right person at the right time. He saved the message and walked onto the stage to teach others how to do the same. Because in the end, that's what all of this was about. Not being a hero, not seeking recognition, just being the person who acted when action was needed, who helped when help was required, who refused to accept that anyone should have to face crisis alone. Just like that night in the boardroom when a heart stopped and hands started moving. Just like every moment since when someone needed help and he'd been there to provide it. One person at a time, one crisis at a time, one life saved leading to hundreds more stabilized. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough.